We come to order, please. We have a lot of witnesses to go through. We had decided to do it in one panel. I even forget what the reason we decided that for now, but both panels are together, correct?
No, one meeting, two panels.
Yes, one meeting, two panels. So we'll call the meeting order pursuant to, come to you in a sec, Ron, pursuant to order of reference on Tuesday, November 15th, 2016, Bill C-29, a second act to implement certain provisions of the budget tabled in Parliament on March 22nd, 2016, and other amendments, and all witnesses are related to their concern or praise on C-29. Mr. Leipert, you had a point you want to raise?
Yeah, I just wanted to, before we start, ask folks in the library if we're still on track to get our pre-budget consultation report at the end of this week.
We believe so, unless Susie has anything to...
Sorry, I'm sorry, your mic wasn't on.
Oh, I'm sorry. I believe we are. Susie has been more recently in contact with them, so she may want to add something.
I think we're on track.
Yeah, we are. We think we're on track.
Okay. We believe we are on track, and that would mean we would have it on Friday. End of business on Friday. Yes, lots of reading. So turning to the witnesses, before I turn to the witness, I did want to, witnesses who are here, I did want to mention that the testimony of Michael Viel, Department of Economics, McMaster University, he wasn't able to come, he intended to come, and so his presentation for members' benefit is on your iPads. Starting then with the first witnesses, if we could ask witnesses to hold their remarks to about 5 minutes, and then we will go to a series of questions. Starting with the Public Interest Advocacy Centre, Mr. Leifert and Mr. St. Amant.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Honourable members, my name is John Lawford, and I am Executive Director and General Counsel at the Public Interest Advocacy Centre, on behalf of which I am appearing today. With me is Jacques Saint-Amand, who teaches consumer law at the University of Quebec at Montreal and acts as a consultant to PIAC regarding financial services. We're focusing today exclusively on Division 5, Part 4 of the bill. Our main message is that the bill's financial consumer protection framework will not improve the protection of banks' customers and may in fact make things worse. In its 2013 budget, the Minister of Finance announced the government's intention to develop a comprehensive financial consumer code to better protect consumers of financial products. This was followed by further announcements on this topic in every single budget, including the 2016 budget, which promised a comprehensive, consolidated framework and include targeted and more flexible consumer protection rules to better respond to Canadians' changing needs. We were cautiously hopeful that needed change was coming. The current rules are deeply unsatisfactory. The FCAC, Financial Consumer Agency of Canada, website lists over 50 provisions of the Bank Act, 28 regulations under the Act, 6 voluntary codes of conduct, and over half a dozen public commitments claiming to protect consumers. Very few consumers know these rules or understand what they mean. Many of them are not strong enough and they are not legally enforceable by a consumer. Often there is no rule beyond a general legal principle to protect the consumer. What Bill C-29 does is to move around the existing rules between the Act and regulations, making the framework more rigid at a time when swift market evolution would require a more flexible set of rules. It does add 5 new principles, the legal impact of which is unclear, and some small changes regarding other issues, but it adds provisions that are clearly also unhelpful to consumers. Bill C-29 does not address the real problems, such as banks unilaterally changing provisions in their terms and conditions or disclaiming in their terms and conditions any liability for mistakes or negligence. As an example, we provide in the annex to these remarks a provision from CIBC's current terms and conditions. There is nothing in the Bank Act, nor in Bill C-29, that prohibits such provisions. Contrast the Consumer Protection Code established by the Central Bank of Ireland, which requires banks to act with skill, care, and diligence in the best interests of their consumers, and which prohibits in principle exclusionary clauses such as I referred to. Complaint resolution is not addressed by Bill C-29, even though the current regime allows a bank to choose its external ombudsman, an obvious conflict of interest. FCAC remains the watchdog under C-29. However, it was given very limited powers in 2001, which have not been significantly increased over time, simply compared to the U.S.'s Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. This is a weak framework. It is full of gaps. We are therefore worried by C-29's apparent attempt to confine the protection of banks' consumers to this regime, as we understand that the intent behind new Section 627.03 is to thwart the application of provincial consumer protection legislation in banking. This is not a good idea. First, consumers of banks would then be less well protected in some provinces than if they did business with, say, a local credit union, which would be subject to provincial rules. In effect, Parliament would be creating a disincentive for consumers to do business with banks. Second, consumers of all provinces may not be treated equally. It's settled law that federal legislation is not paramount to common law, so the absence of any provision regarding unfair transactions in the Bank Act may have no impact on, say, the application of common law unconscionability rules in 9 provinces, but in Quebec, where similar rules are legislated in the Provincial Civil Code and the Consumer Protection Act, those provincial laws could be found to be inoperative under this constitutional theory propounded in the bill. More simply stated, C-29 invites constitutional wrangling under the constitutional theory propounded under this bill. Invites constitutional wrangling instead of promoting legal certainty, which will harm consumers and banks. But we have an even more fundamental issue with what the Minister proposes. In effect, he is inviting Parliament to declare that, in Canada, the convenience of bankers is more important than the protection of consumers. We believe that is mistaken and will not be popular. Financial service consumers would gain by the implementation of a strong, coherent, and comprehensive set of legally enforceable rules that would be consistent with the Canadian constitutional framework established through an open consultative process. This set of federal rules could act as a floor, and if the floor was built high enough, provinces would likely not feel the need to offer additional protection to their residents, which would further the goal of consistency. However, this is not what Bill C-29 currently does. In conclusion, we suggest that this committee recommend to the Minister that he take stock of these issues, withdraw the division from the bill, and consult again in order to implement, in the context of the upcoming global review of the Bank Act, a truly effective financial consumer protection regime. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lawford. Canadian Bankers Association, Mr. Campbell and Ms. Cortiana.
Merci, Monsieur le Président, Mesdames, Messieurs.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. We would like to thank this committee for having invited the Canadian Bankers Association to participate in the committee's review of Bill C-29. The CBA works on behalf of 59 domestic banks, Canadian banks, as well as foreign bank subsidiaries and foreign bank branches operating in Canada, as well as their 280,000 employees.
Provisions contained in Division 5 of Part 4 of the bill. These amendments to the Bank Act consolidate and streamline the consumer protection provisions that apply to banks under a federal financial consumer protection framework. My introductory comments are going to focus on the broader aspects of the amendments that will affect the banking industry and our customers. Building and maintaining a strong client relationship is of fundamental importance to Canada's banks. Banks are an active and essential part of the daily lives of Canadians. 99% of Canadians have an account with a financial institution. So many millions of Canadians turn to banks every day for products, services, and financial advice. We help Canadians safeguard their money, finance a home, manage their savings, plan their investments, and prepare for retirement. Banks in Canada take very seriously their role in the lives of individual Canadians, and Canadians trust their banks and value the products and services they provide. In fact, Canada's banks have been recognized internationally for their commitment to providing a good consumer experience. Our banks have been ranked first out of 32 countries in the Capgemini World Retail Banking Report every year since 2012. Bill C-29 consolidates the consumer protection provisions that exist in federal legislation as they've evolved over many years, as well as including new measures into a single financial consumer protection framework within the Bank Act. By creating a clear federal framework, Bill C-29 ensures that Canadian customers continue to benefit from consistent, safe, and high-quality banking products and services across the country. Consolidating consumer protection and establishing a uniform set of standards under a single framework will improve the efficiency of financial services regulation, ensure consistent policy across the country, prevent consumer confusion, maximize product availability, and ensure that the capacity of the Financial Consumer Agency of Canada to fulfill its regulatory mandate to inform and protect consumers. We support the fact that the consumer protection framework is being placed under the oversight of a single regulator. The FCAC was created in 2001 to strengthen oversight of consumer regulation and expand consumer education. The industry has a long-standing and strong working relationship with the FCAC in many areas, particularly in the area of financial literacy. We also support a framework of consumer protection principles that are not prescriptive and which can be adapted to change. Allowing and encouraging further innovation in the financial sector is essential so that banks can contribute to serve the needs of consumers by developing and enhancing financial products and services and how they are delivered to our customers. As leaders in financial technology, banks in Canada are constantly innovating, developing new products and services to meet the demands of their customers for greater convenience. Canadians can now bank at any time from virtually anywhere through online and mobile banking. Every year, more and more Canadians are adopting online and mobile as their preferred means of banking. Despite this trend, however, banks have maintained an extensive branch network across the country because that is where relationships with their clients are often established and maintained. More clarity about the implementation of the framework is going to be provided through the development of subsequent regulations, and we look forward to engaging in that process. Our aim would be to achieve a workable, efficient, and flexible approach for the benefit of Canadian consumers. With the start of the global financial crisis now nearly a decade behind us, it's important to keep in mind that Canada's prudently managed banks, combined with an effective financial services regulatory and supervisory framework, were key reasons for the strength and the resilience of Canada's banking system. A key lesson of that crisis was the importance of a streamlined, coherent, and unified regulatory system as we have in Canada, with a single regulator responsible for safety and soundness, the Office of the Superintendent of Financial Institutions, and a single regulator for consumer protection, the FCAC. CBA and its members have long supported a strong federal regulatory framework for the benefit of consumers. Although Canadians already benefit from a strong protection system, we think the federal framework proposed in Bill C-29 is an important step in the direction of further improving that regime with a clear, streamlined, and consistent set of regulations that are applied across the country. Encore une fois, nous vous remercions.
I wish to once again thank you for having invited us, and we will be looking forward to your questions. Thank you.
To the Financial Consumer Agency of Canada, Ms. Goulard and Mr. Bilodeau. Go ahead, Ms. Goulard.
Good afternoon and happy Financial Literacy Month. My name is Brigitte Goulard. I am the Deputy Commissioner of the Financial Consumer Agency of Canada, and my colleague Richard Bilodeau is the Director of our Supervision and Promotion Branch. Thank you for the invitation, and I look forward to providing you with our comments on Bill C-29. Un organisme du gouvernement fédéral, la CFC est...
FCAC is a federal government organization charged with protecting consumers of financial products and services. It supervises bank practices, those of federal credit unions, as well as trusts and loan institutions. Furthermore, it develops resources and organizes activities aimed at increasing the financial know-how and knowledge of Canadian consumers. Lastly, the agency's mandate is also to follow trends and issues on the horizon that might have repercussions on the consumers of financial products and services. We supervise external organizations that deal with processing complaints, or ombudsmen if you prefer. Each bank and each credit union federally must be a member of one of the two external organizations that are responsible for complaint processing. If a consumer is of the view that his or her financial institution was not able to process properly a complaint relative to banking activities, it can call upon one of these organizations. The representative of one of these two approved organizations, ADR Chambers Ombudsman Office for Banking Services, is also going to be appearing before you today. We also oversee the respect of certain obligations with regard to commercial practices on the part of credit and debit card networks in order to protect merchants. Among them, we have Visa, MasterCard, American Express, and Interac.
Protection framework included in Bill C-29. If adopted, it will better protect financial consumers. We are particularly pleased with the introduction of guiding principles that set out expectations to guide banks' conduct and will help FCAC interpret and enforce the legislation. Other enhanced consumer protection measures include improving access to basic banking services by allowing the use of a broader range of personal identification documents to open an account or to cash government checks. It also includes strengthening business practices oversight by introducing an enhanced disclosure of key information by expanding the use of summary boxes of information to all banking products and services. It also enhances transparency by requiring banks and external complaint bodies to report on the nature of complaints received. And finally, it will improve accountability by requiring the banks to report on how they are addressing the principles of the consumer framework and the challenges faced by vulnerable Canadians. In anticipation of this new consumer framework, FCAC has spent the last year revising its own supervisory framework. I am pleased to announce that our new supervisory framework will be launched in the spring of 2017. 3 pillars underpin our new supervisory approach. The first pillar focuses on promotion, as FCAC believes that compliance is facilitated when obligations are clearly identified and accessible to regulated entities. Second, FCAC proactively monitors regulated entities to determine whether they are complying with their obligations. FCAC also gathers information on current and emerging issues that impact financial consumers. And finally, FCAC enforces the financial institution's market conduct obligations. When a potential breach of a compliance obligation is identified, we investigate and take the appropriate action to respond to non-compliance and to deter any further non-compliance. With this new supervisory framework, we will proactively identify issues in the marketplace and take a more risk-based approach in our supervision and enforcement activities. We believe this approach will better position us to implement the legislative changes proposed in Bill C-29.
In order to ensure the adoption of the new framework for consumers, FCAC will work in close cooperation with various stakeholders, including consumers, financial institutions under federal regulation, and regulatory organizations in place in the provinces and territories. This approach is based on cooperation, and it is at the very heart of the activities of FCAC and orients all of our activities. Thank you once again for having allowed me to meet with you. My colleague and I will be delighted to answer your questions.
To maybe give an explanation, because it's quite unusual for us to have this many people on a panel. When we first looked at this panel and under the deadline we're under on C-29, we thought there might be votes today. And usually what happens when there are votes, we end up cutting the last panel short. So I'd just encourage members to take notes. We will go 2 rounds of questions, 5 minutes all the way around, because I know there's a lot of panelists. So not everybody has to use their 5 minutes twice, but just so that people will not be rushed and get enough questions in. Association of Canadian Financials Officers, Mr. Chamberlain.
Thank
Scott?
you. Honourable members, thank you for the opportunity to appear today. The Association of Canadian Financial Officers represent the operational core of the federal government's financial workforce. We understand how important public revenue is to delivering vital public services to Canadians, and that fiscal responsibility requires both prudent spending and fair tax collection. We believe the best way to serve Canadians is through responsibly funded public services delivered by professional and a modern public service. We believe that our leaders must first ensure that all Canadians contribute their fair share before resorting to austerity measures and the sale of valuable public assets. We recognize that progress in this regard is being made by this Parliament. You are delivering and engaged in a mission to modernize the tax regime. Millions have been invested in efforts against tax havens, and there has been a corresponding increase in recovered revenue, investigations, and audits. We are encouraged by the government's ongoing review of tax expenditures with the purpose of further simplifying and rendering fair taxation in Canada. ACFO supports these efforts, and we support Bill C-29, which includes provisions that contribute to this work. Today, we offer suggestions only on what further provisions could be implemented to maximize the effectiveness of this new regime. And I'll start with the OECD BEPS initiative. In Budget 2016, the government committed to working with the OECD and its action plan on tax avoidance. The OECD BEPS initiative represents an unprecedented international effort to modernize international tax and to ensure fair and stable government funding globally. C-29 helps establish the cornerstones of OECD BEPS by implementing both the country-by-country reporting standards and the common reporting standard for the automatic exchange of information between tax authorities. These are crucial steps towards a comprehensive global strategy against tax evasion. The country-by-country reporting framework, however, will require further improvements if it is to function optimally. Specifically, many developing countries, including many tax havens, lack the capacity to participate in the OECD BEPS framework, and the vast majority of multinational entities will not be required to report under the current thresholds. Canada should seize the opportunity to lead on tax globally by spearheading the following: supporting developing nations' efforts to build capacity in order to participate in the OECD BEPS framework, calling for the establishment of a UN international tax body to complement the efforts of the G20 and OECD and broaden the base of participation, calling for the lowering of the country-by-country reporting thresholds, which currently would not apply to 90% of the multinational entities, and finally, calling for most of information in the country-by-country reports to be publicly available. The details and full rationale of these recommendations can be found in ACFO's recent white paper, Tax Fairness and Opportunity Lead, copies of which have been provided through the clerk today. In addition to leading on OECD BEPS, a Parliament could continue to focus on complementary domestic measures, including implementing this committee's October 2016 report on the Canada Revenue Agency, tax avoidance and tax evasion. The recommendations therein serve as a practical and reasoned roadmap for building on the progress made thus far. As someone who appeared at that committee, I thank the members for the good work on that report, and we fully support it. Establishing a national public beneficial ownership registry, and finally, continuing in efforts to eliminate tax expenditures, which in our opinion, should include the stock option deduction, which costs $100 billion annually, encourages speculative behavior, and overwhelmingly benefits the top 1% with largely no discernible economic benefit, save and except a reasonable exception for the high-risk, innovative tech sector, where there could be a reasonable cap. In conclusion, as proud, hardworking public servants, ACFO's members helped deliver on this government's agenda of infrastructure investment, reconciliation with our Indigenous people, pay equity, growing the middle class, and supporting sustainable economic growth. C-29 helps establish a stronger and fairer tax regime that we can build on for securing the revenue needed to achieve these goals for Canadians without resorting to further austerity measures and privatization. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chamberlain. The Ontario Association of Radiologists, Mr. Foyle and Mr. Tosser.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for the opportunity to present to this committee. My name is Fabiano Taucher, and I'm here with Ray Foley, the Executive Director of the OAR. I've been a practicing physician in Ontario for 37 years, and for the past 28 years here in Ottawa at the Montfort Hospital as a radiologist and nuclear medicine physician. In a nutshell, there are three issues I want to touch on regarding the small business deduction as it pertains to physician groups. The first, how medical practice has evolved, requiring the creation of group practices to the benefit of patient care. Number two, how the proposed legislation would lead to a dissolution of these group practices, resulting in significant unintended consequences negatively impacting patient care. And three, how and why physician groups should be exempted from the proposed legislation. We're all aware of the ever-increasing complexity of medicine and medical knowledge. Hardly a week goes by that we don't see an item in the newspaper or in the media about some new therapy, some new surgical procedure. Some of you may have seen on CBC television news last night an item where a neurosurgeon in Winnipeg was used a new therapy on a young woman with a brain tumor, inserting a probe into the brain while she was conscious and treating that tumor. This increasing complexity has led to the development of not just specialists, but subspecialists and super subspecialists. The delivery of this type of subspecialty care is fostered and supported within group practices. The provision of 24/7 care from family physicians to specialists and subspecialists is likewise supported within the framework of a group practice. In my own field of diagnostic imaging, groups have evolved to provide a full gamut of care, not just the direct doctor-to-patient care, but there are many things that occur in the background that have a direct and indirect effect on patient care. And we're able to provide these services, many of which are not remunerated or poorly remunerated within the setting of a group practice. Key services such as teaching, research, administration, quality control, leadership, as well as certain clinical services. Yet all of these services impact directly or indirectly on patient care. Pooling of income within a group model allows the best teacher in each subspecialty area to teach, the best administrator to advise the hospital or institution, the best clinician in her field to practice in that area, the best researcher, and so on. This can take place without a financial penalty to the individuals involved. I'm sure you can see how all of this benefits patient care both in the short and in the long term. The removal of the small business deduction would have the opposite effect and would be a disincentive to provide non-remunerative yet important work. Physician partnerships are different from other professional partnerships with respect to this legislation in two important ways. First, they operate in a non-for-profit system with no control over fees that are set by provincial governments. Secondly, there's no multiplication of the small business deduction in physician groups, such as may have occurred with other professional groups. So my premise is simple. The legislation as proposed would have serious short and long-term negative effects on patient care in this country, and I'm sure that that was not the intent of the legislation.
Just in terms of some recommendations in that same aim and that same goal, is that we're seeking that the legislation be amended to carve out publicly funded health care delivered by medical practitioners who deliver their services in professional medicine corporations, which are a readily identified activity by CRA. that to recognize that policy objectives aimed at for-profit partnerships, whether they be legal, accounting, or otherwise, are not applicable to not-for-profit delivery of healthcare services as we know them under the Canada Health Act, following the litmus test of medically necessary examinations. The third would be that a decision on this matter be made quickly. We have 1,000 radiologists in Ontario, 2,800 across Canada, who, in the case of 1,000 physicians in Ontario, they service 13 million patients. The lack of a decision is causing people to make decisions, and when enjoined with some of the other, turbulent activities happening in the public sector at a provincial level, this creates unnecessary and dangerous instability. And the concern is that physicians, not just radiologists, but physicians generally, will do what happened in the 1980s and 90s and early 2000s, and that was that they will move to other jurisdictions, principally the U.S., to provide services. That obviously is one of the unintended consequences that we see, that obviously tax planners and policymakers did not have in mind when they set out to do this, in terms of what the implication is for both federal and provincial health policy across the country. And the third is that if there is a change in this in the tax legislation, that it be communicated as effectively and as efficiently as possible, that it be done through bodies like our own or the Canadian Medical Association, in order to address this significant undercurrent that remains in the minds of practicing doctors across the country. Thank you.
Okay, thank you all very much for your presentations. Turning to the first round of questions, Mr. Sabera.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and welcome everyone. I do wish to acknowledge two young folks from my riding that are here in the committee paying attention, so they're singing in the back, so welcome Stefano and Cassandra. It's great that you can spend the day with the MP. Now on to the questions. I'll divide my time up and I'll group it into the Canadian Bankers Association along with Mr. Lawford and Mr. Armont, and then I'll move over to the radiologists. Mr. Campbell, with regards to your comments on the Canadian Banking Association, I'm generally in line with your view of it. We've always maintained a strong regulatory framework, and it's always been a balance between provincial jurisdiction and federal jurisdiction with regards to the banks in Canada, more so on the federal side. And one of the reasons we came out of the financial crisis so strong, I believe, is that we had a lot of good regulatory oversight from the federal side, be it OSFI and other regulatory institutions. So I wondered if you could elaborate on the streamlined and clear and consistent set of regulations comment that you mentioned.
Sure. Thank you very much, and I appreciate those comments. It's again, I go back to the financial crisis, that if we looked at many other jurisdictions in the world, certainly south of the border, we saw a multiplicity of regulators often working at cross purposes. We didn't have that here. And I do agree with you that strong regulation and strong supervision through a unified regulator was part of the recipe for why Canada was able to get through the crisis with its held head high and served as a model. And I see the bill, quite frankly, in front of us as carrying on that tradition. Our sense is that what is important for the consumer is a consistent, clear, and coherent set of rules that is under the supervision, under a uniform system of supervision. It doesn't help consumers at all to have duplication or conflict or confusion as to who to turn to in cases of concerns. And in our view, no, the devil is in the details. We haven't seen all the regulations yet, but what Bill C-29 does from our perspective is provide that clarity of intent, provides for uniform consumer protection, and uniform supervision. And we think that this is the strongest system, and it's already with a high-quality set of rules, higher actually in terms of some of the changes and enhancements and new provisions put in. We think this will be good for consumers.
Okay, thank you, sir. Over to the radiologist. There was one interesting comment in your presentation about that within the group structure that there is no multiplication of the small business deduction. Can you just elaborate within that? And obviously, we have heard, and I have heard from a number of physicians and physicians groups across country in the last number of weeks, in the last few days. So I do understand your concerns, but I was wanting to zero in on this comment that you made about the no multiplication of the small business tax deduction.
Thank you for the question and picking out the one thing that doesn't have to do with medicine.
I'm not a doctor.
So I would describe it this way. In the current setting, you may have, in our group, we have 12 radiologists. Each of those 12 radiologists is entitled to take advantage of the small business deduction. And there's not an additional deduction for each of those radiologists. Should the legislation go through, the partnership would be dissolved and each of those 12 radiologists would be allowed to take advantage of the small business deduction. So that doesn't directly answer your question, but my understanding of multiplication, there are certain partnership structures that allow for individuals to effectively have take advantage of that low tax rate for small business multiple times rather than just one for that individual.
That is the way I understand it as well. And within the other comments you made about, we know the delivery of healthcare is more so a provincial area responsibility. Obviously, there is the Health Canada transfer and a lot of other stuff, but in terms of delivery, and I am worried about the unintended consequences of changes. So, and your comments on your specialty care and subspecialty care within the group practices, can you elaborate on that, please?
Certainly. In our group and many groups like it, the group provides a radiologist to consult with the hospital. Generally, it's the chief or or another member wherever it's appropriate, and that is those services are not remunerated. I sit on the radiation safety committee for the hospital. That's not remunerated. I was chief for 10 years, and I can't count the number of meetings where I attended where everybody in the room is paid, but not me. And that is a sort of non-medical care that is supported by group practice. Was that a bell?
Go ahead.
I'll give you another example. There are many interventional procedures that, for whatever reason, are very poorly paid, but very important. Radiologists perform procedures through a very small hole in the skin where before they were done with open surgery, and patients really appreciate that. Those are very poorly remunerated. In a group setting, the physician offering that service is not penalized financially. The income is pooled and everybody shares in that income. So certainly you can see as a patient, you would want to have a system where physicians doing important things are not given a disincentive.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Deltel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ladies and gentlemen, be welcome in your House of Commons Committee, Parliamentary Committee on Finance. Mes premières questions vont porter avec...
First questions will be for you, Mr. Campbell. On the banking system, I'm very pleased to welcome you to our committee. You know better than anyone else at the beginning of October, the Minister of Finance decided to tighten up standards for access to property with what we call the stress test, where we double, to a certain extent, mortgage rates. I'm cutting corners by saying that, but it's to determine whether the person who wants to borrow would be able to survive such a situation if interest rates were to go up. With the statement made by the President of the Federal Reserve Board that the interest rates in the United States could go up as of December, and December is in a week, we are all obviously quite concerned by all this. But first of all, I would like to ask you a question regarding interest rates for first-time buyers. What was the reaction that you felt in your banks among potential clients, including young families and first-time home buyers?
Je m'excuse, il faut m'exprimer.
I'm sorry, I will have to answer in English.
It is the question that is on everybody's mind these days. Housing is, you can't open the newspaper without seeing something about housing. What I would say is this. I'm going to answer your question in a bit of a roundabout way, but I'll come very specifically to the answer. We have seen over the housing market, the mortgage market in Canada, is an extraordinarily complex one, as you know. I mean, there's no one mortgage market. There are a range of factors going into affordability. The key thing that we look for, and we look for it when the previous government made a series of changes, we look for it when the current government turns its minds to issues, is the balance between if the goal is to maybe slow things down, take a little bit of the heat off, and maybe spread out the risk a little bit on the one hand, but not damaging the vitality of the marketplace on the other hand. And so therefore what we look for are targeted, incremental, step by step. Now, every bank is going to have their own portfolio. Every bank will have their own relations with customers. From what we have seen so far, I think the reaction that my bankers tell me is that let us see how these current set of changes, the stress test that you mentioned, the portfolio test, the changes in down payments that were made last December, let us see how those work through the marketplace before we contemplate any further changes. Because I do think that where most people are focused is the impact on those first-time customers. So.
But the point is, Mr. Campbell, is that why do we have to have all those rules, all those new rules, while you should be more cautious with your clients, you know? Because when we knock at the door for the first time for a bank, all of us are a little bit nervous. I'm sure it was the case for you. I can tell you that it was the case for me. And, you know, I had the chance, it was 25 years ago, you know, I had a mortgage, good one, I'm very pleased with that, but I could have gone higher than that, even nearly twice. Said, you know, you have good wages, your wife too has good wages, so you could rent to a little bit more. Well, it would have put me in jeopardy. So don't you think that yourself, as banker, can be more cautious to the young people who are knocking at the door instead of having those new tests implemented by the government?
Well, two things on that. First of all, for me, it was 35 years ago, and my interest rates were 16% and 18% respectively.
Oh, you were there?
Wowee. Anyway, so to your point, let me say a couple of things. First of all, the quality of the underwriting has not changed. It is as strict as it ever was, and our prudential regulator won't let it be any other than it is. And in fact, Mr. Deltel, I think a very telling case is that one of the proofs of the quality and the strictness on the underwriting is the rates of mortgages in arrears when people can't pay them back. And it is at virtually a historic low. It is less than half of 1%. It's currently sitting at 0.28%. And it's been under 0.5% in periods of high inflation, low inflation, high unemployment, low unemployment. So what that says to me is two things. It says that banks continue to be very strict lenders, just by culture, but also our regulators require it. But also Canadians are very, very good borrowers. I mean, they're very careful in paying their loans back. But I appreciate the question.
Go ahead. Just the last question, and yes, you're right. You know, I heard once Premier Jean Charest said in a speech, you know, Canadians are dull. this is why we're safe. I'm sure you will be happy that I quote him. But last question, Mr. Campbell, I raised the issue in my introduction note. A few days ago, the chair of the Federal Reserve Bank in America said that they could raise the point. Are you afraid of that, or are you cautious of that, or are you?
Well, we've been watching the Federal Reserve Board for quite some time, and will they raise it? I think it will happen. I don't know. I'm not making a prediction. I would say this: the Deputy Governor of the Bank of Canada, Tim Lane, was asked that question. He made very clear in his speech shortly after the speculation about where the Federal Reserve Board will go. He said, Canada does not need to work in lockstep with the United States. We will not march in lockstep. We will consider the circumstances as appropriate to Canada. Now, you know, this is not my decision, it's theirs. We're going to have to see. The United States is going up like this, but if you look around the rest of the world, it's kind of hard, it's not out of second gear yet, right? And so I think that our bank, our Bank of Canada setting the rates will take into account all the factors it needs to, but it will look for a made in Canada approach. That's my sense.
Thank you very much. Mr. Caron, 7 minutes.
Merci beaucoup. Merci.
Thank you very much, and thank you to the witnesses for being here. I would like to start Mr. Lanford and Mr. Campbell. Your testimony on the impact of Section 5 was pretty different. Let's start with Mr. Campbell. When it comes to the arguments that presented by Mr. Lawford, would you have a response regarding his concerns, regarding the skills and jurisdiction, and the impact that this could have overall, lead to weaker protection of consumers?
I say this with respect and affection for my friends from PIAC. Okay, of course. But I disagree. You know, I disagree. I think that I disagree on a range of fronts. I think that if you look at it from the perspective of a consumer, what the consumer does not want to have are conflicting provisions that they don't know which will apply. They don't want to have provisions that can't work together. They don't want to have provisions where there is confusion. Do I go to the FCAC? Do I go to the Ombudsman? Do I go elsewhere? The other thing to bear in mind is that unlike provincial credit unions, which are in a local area, banks work across the country. This is a national regime. And people move in Canada, and banks have to plan on a nationwide basis. And so what we see in this legislation is we think there is strength in a uniform approach. We think there is strength in uniform supervision so that, and we quite frankly, everyone around this table are federal MPs who have the view about how policy should be formulated. We think a uniform approach to policy is a good idea. So,
merci beaucoup. Mon temps est limité.
Oui, je comprends. Oui.
Thank you very much. My time is limited. Yes, I understand. I will respond in English.
Don't necessarily want a uniform approach. There's some advantages to it, but what they really want is a good approach. And the rules that are being offered here today in C29 are basically sweeping a bunch of present rules into the Act and adding not very much. And in return, consumers are being asked to, in certain provinces, forgo protections that they have, notably in Quebec, but there will be other provinces where there are higher standards, which will be cut off at the knees potentially by this bill. So what consumers really want is good banking practice, good financial services practice, and that's what they're looking for. So the suggestion that they'll be confused by it is unnecessary. If this bill had had more consumer protection in it, there would have been less need to say there's going to be a problem in the future. But because there's so little, I can guarantee you there will be problems in the future because consumers will be unsatisfied. They will go to their governments, provincial or federal, and ask for more.
Merci beaucoup. Donc, vous pensez vraiment qu'il y a...
Thank you very much. So you really think that there is a jurisdictional constraint there? Can we talk about what's happening on the level of the Commission's organization? Securities Commission, rather? With all the respect that I owe to Parliament, Parliament cannot easily change the Constitution. The Supreme Court has repeated for years that there is shared jurisdiction when it comes to protecting bank consumers. When the minister, with all due respect, indicates that he wants to regulate and uniformize everything, that may lead to difficulties when it comes to the Securities Commission. And so we may end up before the courts. I am sure that that will be the case. These measures are a recipe leading to new constitutional litigation. Mr. Chamberlain, very quick question. We are not opposed in principle to respecting the criteria set out by the OECD when it comes to the BEPS, but this could lead to a false sense of security because we've seen that Canada supported certain treaties, tax conventions, tax information exchange, seem to give confidence, saying that Canada is limiting tax evasion, but in the end, their effect, it seems to be contrary to that which was intended. Do you have the same concerns when it comes to the standards set up by the BEPS that Canada could support?
Yes, absolutely. The OECD is a good base, as I explained, but only 10% of the multinational entities are going to be captured by it, and a vast majority of countries will not be participating in the country-by-country reporting because they either don't have the capacity to do so, and so we will not have that information. So it is a good base to improve on, but we'll find that it's very ineffectual initially until more countries are able to participate in country-by-country reporting. Yeah, I do think it creates a false sense of security. There's much more work to be done, but we'll give credit where credit's due that at least this is the beginning, a baby step. And we feel that Canada needs to take the lead in supporting those countries, many of whom are tax havens, in being able to build up the capacity to report. Because in the end, country-by-country reporting is about Canada knowing what corporations are paying tax here, what tax they're paying in other countries, and that's the core of getting at tax evasion, and we're not going to get that presently.
Merci beaucoup. J'aurais une dernière question pour M. Tard.
Thank you very much. Final question. You are aware of the measures targeting small businesses and the impact that could have. Surely you have spoken to representatives of the government about this. What was the response that you received about the concerns that you raised before the committee?
Maybe you should answer. I didn't really hear the question. Okay. Pouvez-vous répéter?
Could you please repeat the question?
Sorry, I had French.
Rapidement, je vais juste répéter mot pour mot ce que j'ai dit.
Very quickly, I'll just repeat what I said. I did not speak with members of the government. I will repeat almost word for word. You are aware of the measures affecting the deduction for small businesses and the impact that will have on you. Surely you spoke to representatives of the government about the concerns that you expressed before the committee. What was the response that you received?
Thank you. The response, we did meet senior finance department officials who actually were responsible for crafting the legislation. And their response was that their concern was about tax policy, not about other consequences, namely, of course, in our area, health policy, or about how the rubber hit the road in terms of how this impacted on the delivery of patient care, or how physicians were organized in order to deliver patient care, or that that the synergy of physician groups, whether they be radiologists or surgeons or others, would be affected. And so it was a sort of a clash between tax policy, in a sense colliding with both federal and provincial health policy. Federal health policy is Canada Health Act, and that's by which all health administration is governed across the country. And so, you know, physicians are purely in a publicly funded healthcare system, and that's what we're talking about. The synergy of 20 physicians working together is more than 20 physicians working individually. And so for the past 30 years, accepted health policy in this country has been around getting physicians to work in teams with other teams of physicians in order to avoid cracks, patients falling between these cracks, and to provide a much higher level of care. That level of care is an intricate combination of general practice, general skills, with specialty skills and subspecialty skills, and in tertiary care centers like teaching hospitals, even super specialized cares where very unique skills are located, but where they're vitally important for the delivery of the full landscape of the full waterfront of what patients are expected to receive in our healthcare systems across the country.
Thank you, Mr. Foley. Mr. Graywell.
I think it's Ms. O'Connell.
Oh, no, it was you.
Oh, okay, perfect. I can go now. Sorry? No, I appreciate that, Ron, but I don't think you'd ask the same questions as me. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, the witnesses, for coming. On the consumer protection discussion, I just want to get your comments, Terry, on the balance between the consumer protection and protecting Canadians and the bank's ability to operate. And have we achieved that balance, or in your professional opinion, where did that balance exist? And has any country in the G7 particularly got it right?
That's a very big question. So here we go. I would say the balance. This is a moving target, eh? I mean, it's consumer protection is not a static matter. Consumer protection regulation is not a static matter. We have the establishment of a framework here, but that can be built on. And I think Mr. Lawford mentioned the Bank Act in a few years' time. That might be another platform. What you always have to be able to do, and I think actually there's a section in the statute that addresses this. What it says is, and let me just find it if I might, flipping. The purpose is to provide a uniform protection of customers, is to provide uniform supervision, but it's also intended to provide a uniform set of rules so that banks can operate efficiently. Now, have we got that balance? I would have said the consumer regime since I've been at the CBA, certainly in the last 10 years, has simply gone up and up and up and up. I don't say that in any kind of negative way. It's a fact. Compliance budgets have gotten considerably larger. Our engagement with the FCAC considerably more intense. Any other jurisdictions around the country or around the world? I go back to history, and I think it's still true. I would not trade any regulatory or banking system regime with any other country that we have right here and now in Canada, and I'm proud of it. And I think that the different elements, bank culture, bank management, supervision, regulation, work together very well.
Thank you, Mr. Mr. Lawford, any comments on my question?
Yes, I would trade instantly for the Irish system or Australia if I were a Canadian consumer. They have a clear financial consumer code in both of those countries. I'll give you one quick example. Guarantees. You go in with your child, you're an older person who wants to start a business. In Ireland, you're required to have a separate meeting because you could lose your home to support your child through the love of being with that child. In Canada, you sit in the same room, you sign the documents all at one time. They've taken that extra step because they realize there are often problems where someone who has been put into a conflict position doesn't know it, doesn't have the right advice. So that's a very concrete example where they do it better in Ireland.
In your opinion, they do it better in Ireland, but how does that impact their actual banks from doing their business?
Well, they're still conducting business in Ireland and doing consumer retail banking. I don't know that there's been any loss of business there. It's best not to mix up stability, financial stability of the institutions with these consumer protection matters. The financial stability and the reserves that banks need and all of those other Basel kind of things, really it's not the same question as consumer protection. What we're talking about is what happens when I'm wronged by a bank and I need redress. It's very hard to get in this country, it's very confusing, and my rights are quite limited.
Sir.
If I may briefly add something. It's interesting that the banks actually thrive on using provincial legislation in areas such as providing mortgages, for instance. When provincial legislation enables them to do what they want to do, they're happy with it. But when it might, in some ways, inconvenience them, then they'd rather not have to abide by provincial legislation. In some cases, that means that consumers will be less well protected than they currently are.
Thank you, gentlemen. Well, I'm sure you'll be happy to know that I'm a strong advocate as well to ensure that there's financial literacy being taught at a much younger age in school, because I think that's also a big component to ensuring that Canadians are protected across the board. If Canadians know the right questions to ask their banks when they go in. Mr. Chair, for time.
You are pretty near out of time, but you got time for one.
Last question to the radiologist. I think you're going to be picked on a little bit today, not on purpose by any means. The question is, do you agree with the Government of Canada estimates that the effect of Budget 2016, a measure would effectively amount to a very modest increase in the tax burden for affected professionals?
It was certainly not modest for physicians, and I don't agree with it. I'm not sure the figure you used, but
the example would be a physician making over $200,000 in salary, pre-budget and post-budget 2016. I mean, the additional expenditure will be in the hundreds, which for somebody making over $200,000, I mean, sorry.
Well, if that was the case, I wouldn't be here. You can be assured of that. And our figures are significantly different. I believe they're, Ray could speak to it, but in the $30,000 to $50,000 range.
So it's a physician making over $200,000 or $200,000 a year, or a physician making $1 million a year, and the tax burden is $30,000 to $50,000. Like, what number are you guys working off of? Because that's the key to the whole argument, right?
Well, I'm not sure that it's the key to the argument. First of all, the way you use salary is something that we as physicians, we're constantly fighting. We bill for services we provide, so we're not salaried employees. We have no benefits. We have no pension. So if you use $200,000 as a gross income, it would be like the owner of the corner store getting $200,000 of gross income, and then paying all the overhead, all the employees, all the benefits, etc. And perhaps that would, in that case, maybe $100 difference is accurate. But what is not accurate is to characterize that $200,000 as a salary. What it is a gross income to a small business.
I'm going to have to cut you there. I expect we'll be in this discussion a few more times before we hit the 5 o'clock. Mr. Albas.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to everyone for coming today and sharing your expertise on this particular piece of legislation. I'm going to be focusing my time particularly on the Ontario Association of Radiologists. Do appreciate that being there. Mr. Greywall has already talked about salary and whatnot, and what I'm concerned about, Mr. Chair, is when I go to many parts of rural British Columbia in my riding, oftentimes it's more difficult to attract physicians. And raising taxes like this government has done on high-income earners has made it more difficult to attract physicians, particularly when places like the United States, right across the border, not very far away, is doing that. So I'm very alarmed that not only are we providing disincentives for people that are working solo, but now in a way that affects our provincial and territorial partners. Sir, I was sent an email here earlier saying that many of these medical structures were formed to deliver provincial and territorial health priorities. You've mentioned a number of them, particularly teaching, research, clinical services, and that these changes will impact the service and cause many of these group partnerships, which have developed over 15 to 20 years, and that jeopardizes not just the some of these, what you said, or badly remunerated services, but will actually compromise health care for patients and the care that they get. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. There are a number of points I'd like to make, but I'll try and make it brief and just use an example.
I would much rather have you get them all on the table.
Fine. Use the example of institutions where they do research and teaching. These large groups that work in those types of hospitals function as a group, and the group supports the individual that is involved in teaching, that is involved in research. In this country, money is short everywhere, but there's not a lot of money for research in this country, and research is vitally important. The reason why I said, I kept getting back to patient care, all the items I talked about, at the end of the day, it funnels down to patient care. If you have good research, you're going to get, a better result in the end, and everybody appreciates that. So those individuals are financially supported by the groups. The provincial government in Ontario has established something called an AFP, an alternative funding plan, specifically to encourage groups to form so that they can support teaching and research, which they recognize is underfunded.
So you see right now the provinces are trying to structure services in such a way for everyone's benefit, but now we seem to, at the federal level, we're actually discouraging it.
Well, certainly the proposal of this legislation would work at counterpoint to the province's
Well, we had actually
direction.
officials come in the other day, and they did mention, because I think you raised earlier about, where is this all coming from? What it seemed to sound like is that it's about revenue, and they just don't agree with the assessment that this structure, they believe it's a way very similar to the Prime Minister's comments that he believed that many small businesses, their owners, are simply a way for small business tax rates are a way for them to enrich themselves at the expense of everyone else. I'm not paraphrasing properly there, but I think that's the point. Now, I did receive this earlier, and this is what I heard here from a gentleman who actually operates out of the University of Western Ontario in the London Health Sciences Centre, and he said, "In our centre alone, it will jeopardize a practice model that has taken 15 to 20 years to develop. This negative impact will be felt by all groups, and in the end, patient care will suffer." So would you agree with all those points?
Absolutely agree. I trained in London, Ontario. It's a great centre. University Hospital is a wonderful hospital, and I benefited from the teaching.
Only hearing from Ontario doctors, and by the way, I love the fact that you're here to present, but why is the fulcrum of this practice really in Ontario?
No, it's Canada-wide. The reason why I'm shocked as well. I would expect, I would have hoped to have a barrage of physicians, but the reality is everybody is really busy providing patient care. There aren't enough doctors, there aren't enough specialists. And the reason why I'm here, I'm the alternate, because the president of the OIR, Mark Perdidis, who was supposed to be here, is on call, and he couldn't get off of, he couldn't find someone to replace him. So he's looking after patients as a priority. And I happen to not be on call today, but I'm going to be doing my day's work tonight and tomorrow night. Yeah. So
I think the other thing to appreciate is that when we talk about groups, certainly in radiology, groups on average range from 10 radiologists to 100. So obviously the 100 are large urban tertiary centers, but these are major collections of individuals with a very broad range of skills, and it works accordingly down the smaller. So to the earlier part of your question, something we didn't mention, but the impact of this is on, it will be in small town Ontario, rural Ontario, Canada, rural Canada, underserviced Canada, but it will also be in urban suburban as people decide that this model is, which has been cultivated by the provincial governments across the country, by hospitals across the country, to work in teams, to create this coalition, to create greater critical masses of skills. So the radiologists, for example, who work with emerge physicians, everyone who walks in emerge is typically running through the hands of a radiologist. Oncologists for the treatment of cancer, stroke, you name it, surgeons, internal medicine physicians, all are acting in teams in combination. And so this puzzle that has been crafted over really 30 years is now being accidentally, I think. I don't think anyone is doing it deliberately, but that's the name of our talk, is it an unintended consequence? And to give you an example of another unintended consequence, why we're sort of in a sense, the canary in the mine, is that these things happen before for tax reasons or for financial reasons that led to long waiting lists, whether it was CT or MRI, whether it were cancer wait lists, hips and knees. This is not intended to, but this will have the effect of creating those kinds of things down the road. It'll happen first in the hinterland of the country, and it'll work to the center. Physicians are already, again, no fault of the federal government or the finance department, but there is a lot of turbulence going on in the country. You're asking why radiologists? We're a very large group. We watch this. We became aware of it. People were asking questions. We're representing radiologists and other physician groups from across the country who are asking the same thing. The CMA will be here this afternoon talking about the same thing.
We'll have to cut it there, Ray. We're well over. I've let it go over a few times on this discussion because I think it's an important discussion. Ms. O'Connell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I apologize to the other witnesses, but I'm going to jump in on this conversation too because I do have some questions. I can barely see you, but no, it's okay. I have a few concerns in regards to when we're talking about, and I understand your response from the finance officials. We are talking about tax policy, and the concern I have is in regards to this idea of care as a result of tax policy. Because, I mean, physicians and doctors, and I know many, that do a lot that go above and beyond, and they took an oath that is above and beyond just financial conversations. And you brought up one point about, specifically about certain doctors, certain specialists who are not actually compensated very well for some of the work they do. But should tax policy really be a substitute for compensation? Shouldn't those performing duties be compensated in a way that is fair, and each province deals with that? But why should tax policy become the substitute for fair compensation?
So, if I may.
Okay, go ahead.
My understanding of tax policy is that taxes they're not just intended to get money for the government, and there's a second part to tax policy, and that is to influence behavior of people. And we do that all the time. We use tax policy to encourage people to go to remote areas. We'll use tax policy to discourage people from polluting. I think that perhaps the purpose of taxes is much broader than that. And regardless, like it or not, and I agree with you, I think that services should be fairly remunerated. The reality is that they are not. And so we're dealing in the real world, we have to deal with it, and the proposed legislation would have a negative impact on care, whether we like it or not. And that's what I was trying to...
Thank you. And so, although I'm trying to stay focused on the tax policy, which is what we're actually dealing with, I can't, because we're talking about a lot of other things. Mr. Albus raised the point that somebody sent to him that, we're moving away, or this has been a model for 15, 20 years that we're moving away from. But I think there's some argument that, are we moving to a better model, or has that been a better model? 20 years ago, if you went into your doctor, in a lot of cases, there was a continuity of care. And going into group models, sometimes, you can go into a doctor and you never see the same doctor, even though that's your family doctor. And in the past, models used to be that if a physician, let's say, went on vacation or was off sick themselves, they had family health groups or family health teams that would come in and substitute. So people had this continuous care, doctors that knew who they were, doctors who understood their medical history, instead of every single time having somebody new. So we're not here to debate whether one model is better than the other, because frankly, that's outside of this purview. But it's been brought up that this will create a system of sole practitioners because there's a benefit. But I'm trying to understand that perhaps sole practitioners might not be such a bad thing in terms of care.
So just maybe, I think for a moment, last year and for many years, the tax ruling or the interpretation by CRA has been that this has been a permissible model. So physicians across the country have received these tax rulings, and they have formed, groups, not just radiologists but surgeons, family physicians, the alternative funding teams in London and other academic centres. So what you're doing is sort of unwinding here, and we think unintentionally, all of that integration of care. And so in health policy, everything is about integrating care. It's about closing the gaps. We're not talking about the quality care from an individual physician, but particularly in large practices, certainly in specialty medicine, everything in the science and the evidence is about practicing in groups, not as solo. That was the old model, and there are actual quality concerns about physicians practicing alone or in one or two individuals.
But sorry, this wouldn't prevent, my understanding, if someone was in a group model but now goes into a small business as an individual, that doesn't prevent them from that integration of care. Because we're getting away from the idea of group care, but this is a business structure, not a care structure in terms of your partnerships with other facilities or your partnerships with other doctors and things like this. It would be a tax structure of how the individual sets up their business. And if this is wrong, tell me, educate me. But what I'm saying is, this doesn't just, all of a sudden, if somebody goes into a business structure, then they no longer work with anybody else.
So what you're suggesting is correct if you have all physicians providing the exact same service. So for instance, family doctors, if each family doctor provided the same service and billed the same amount, worked the same hours, it would work fine. But the reality is that medicine has evolved tremendously since the days of Marcus Welby. And so it's no longer the case. Medicine requires subspecialization. And you can no longer have that one doctor that knows everything, or even a group of doctors. Radiology is a fairly specialized field. Well, even in radiology, in my group, we have subspecialists in neuroradiology, subspecialists in musculoskeletal, abdominal imaging. And because the fee schedule is what it is, they all, if they were individuals, they would all bill different amounts.
Aren't those subspecialists?
Sorry, Jen, you're well over. Mr. Leipert.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to quickly, a couple of comments, Mr. Foley and Mr. Tosser. In a previous life, I was a health minister in Alberta, and if there's one thing that drove me crazy, it was the fact that the medical profession didn't work as groups. And I think the advancement that you've made in the last decade or so has been phenomenal in terms of providing that kind of care to the patient. And we could get into a pretty good debate with my friends across the way here about these things. But Mr. Foley, you've said a couple of times this is accidental, unintended consequences. We had finance officials here last week, and I don't think it was accidental. And I think in listening to some of the questions that are coming from the government side, I'm convinced it's not accidental. I'm convinced that this is the beginning of how this government is going to move into small business taxation. We had a budget where First, we had an election where not only the Prime Minister said, well, we can, we're going to increase taxes a little bit higher on the high-income earners. He said that small businesses in many cases were nothing more than a tax dodge. So now what we're seeing in this budget, where we did not have, as promised in the election campaign, a reduction in the small business tax, we are now seeing a tax coming on small business. And for Mr. Greywall, who unfortunately isn't here, we're going to see with the Canadian Medical Association in their presentation in the next group, that as an example, in the province of Nova Scotia, the tax rate goes from 13.5% to 31%. That's hardly hundreds of dollars. So I think, with all due respect, gentlemen, if this gets changed, it's going to be because of the work of people on this side of the table and because of people like you. It is not an accident, and if it doesn't get changed, that will prove me correct. And I see Mr. Champagne sitting right next to you, who can take that back to the finance minister. So those are my comments regarding that, and I'm not sure if you want to make any other comments, but I would suggest that this is this year. Next year it's going to be groups of general practitioners or other medical professionals, and I think this is a trend that's going to happen.
We may be guilty of being naive or being too nice. Tax law is not what physicians do.
That's right.
So I think that a comment would be that physicians, when those comments were made during the election, to a large extent didn't believe that they applied to doctors because it's not normally part of the orbit. When it became aware that this might, and then it did involve physicians, there was a significant level of concern, and I think that concern continues, and some of the turbulence that I refer to happening at provincial levels, it has the effect of causing physicians who are highly mobile to consider should they stay in this country or should they leave. There's an immediate advantage of 30% or more to go to the U.S.
And let me tell you, if Mr. Trump carries through with his reductions in income tax or personal income tax rate, that wee little bit extra that this government has said they're going to squeeze out of the high-income earners, they're going to get nothing out of the high-income earners because they're all going to be crossing the border and working, including a whole bunch of healthcare professionals. I'll leave it at that because I have a question over here. Mr. Lawford, you represent public interest advocacy, which you spoke on behalf of consumers. And then Ms. Goulard, am I pronouncing your name right? I'm sorry if I'm not. You represent the Financial Consumer Agency of Canada. And when I heard the two presentations, who's representing consumers here? Because quite frankly, they couldn't have been more opposite unless my hearing was going wrong. So I'd like each one of you to maybe give me, as a layman, an example or two of, in your particular case, Mr. Lawford, what are a couple of examples of how this is going to make it worse, and in Ms. Goulard's case, how it's going to make it better?
Sure. Well, there are some little minor things that do make it worse. One of them is that you're going to have, there's a deemed delivery rule in this thing now that says that once a bank mails you something 5 days later, it's deemed that you've received it. Well, you might not have received it, so that's a weird little one. But the larger issue is if there is a change such that provinces are shaken out of dealing with banking. You have a regime in Quebec where you can't exclude liability, and yet banks' terms and conditions often exclude liability for many things, and so that will be lost to consumers as well. So it's not that we don't want to have a national, federal level playing field and consistent rules for everybody across the country. The trouble is that the level that's being offered in this bill is too low, and it could have been higher because we expected a financial consumer code. It's not what we got. We got something quite a bit less.
Thank you. We are the regulator for the financial institutions. We are not a consumer advocate. We look after consumer interests. I think that's the distinction between Mr. Lawford and ourselves. We believe that this is going to be very good for consumers, and I'll give you just two examples. One is broad and the other one is very specific. One specific example is one of the ways that we disclose information to consumers is through information boxes. So if you open your credit card application, you will find on the cover an information box which includes information just as the interest rate that's going to be applied and other relevant information. One of the things that this government has done is that the bill has done is that information boxes will now be required for a much broader set of products and services so that consumers have an easy way to find the information when they are purchasing products from banks. That's very specific. There's a number of very specific examples. One much broader example are the new principles. The legislation now includes 5 principles that will direct the banks in terms of how they need to conduct themselves with consumers. So broader access to products, must treat consumers and the public fairly. And Mr. Lawford a couple times referred to Ireland and how well it treats its customers. Well, Ireland is one of the countries that we will be looking at because they already have a principle-based approach. So perhaps the approach that Mr. Lawford is referring to is the approach that we will now be adopting in Canada, which is a principle-based approach. We will be implementing these requirements, and we have spent quite a bit of time examining what's going to be required of us, and I can say that it's much broader than what Mr. Lawford perhaps is referring to, because we see there are very small changes that have been made that will have a significant impact, we think, on consumers' interest. So we are looking forward to implementing.
Thank you both. Robert, do you have a quick couple of questions? We're a little over time, but it's my fault we let it go over on a number of questions. Go ahead.
Short-changed, Mr.
You
Chair.
are.
Oh, well, thank you very much for coming. Just a few quick questions for Monsieur Campbell. I was just wondering if you had any information on how many bank accounts were actually refused to Canadians.
Specifically, I don't have those specific numbers, but I can tell you in the reverse that depending on the specific survey, between 96% and 99% of Canadians have a bank account, an account with a financial institution. The vast majority do. There are some provisions in the legislation where, for fraudulent purposes, accounts can be denied and so on.
Okay.
But the vast majority are covered.
Okay, I was just wondering how many banks are found on reserves or in, especially on First Nations reserves or in rural areas.
I don't have that specific number. I can get that number to you. I do know that banks are, take a lot of care of both on the employment side and on sponsorships and education.
Of course, of course. I was wondering if another question you could get back to me is, I was wondering if you could probably talk a little bit or send us the information about what you believe low cost or no cost actually means and how many people that would apply to. So that would be information I'd be interested in receiving for the entire committee at some later date, and I won't have time to get that on the record. And then I'd just like to point out one final thing concerning, for instance, in my riding I have an awful lot of homeless people, and it's very difficult for them in order to open up bank accounts. In the 2007 report from Toronto, 60% of homeless people do not have bank accounts, and it's very hard for them to get ID and where do you start. And so I was reading the documents in the bill, and it's very good. Access to basic banking service division 3 opening, and it lists all the things that you can get. But if you're a homeless person with no ID, you essentially can't get a bank account. So if you can't get a bank account, you can't have direct deposit for your social assistance or your welfare checks. You can't gain access to other government services. It becomes another barrier. And I guess what I would encourage is more banks, like the Bank of Montreal, which works with a clinic in Nova Scotia, the ID clinic, to help get ID to people. And the Bank of Montreal there in that one town in Halifax gives $25 into the bank account in order to get more people accessing the service. So it's a great thing the banks are doing, and I encourage more large banks which enjoy the monopoly here in Canada to continue to try and get more people into the banking system, so it's not 96% but 100% who have access.
It's a fair point.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
If you could provide information that Mr. Ouellette asked for. I have to come back to the radiologists for a minute. In layman's terms, you have Dr. A, you've got Dr. B, and you've got Dr. C. Do they currently operate or could they currently operate in a situation where they would have availability of the small business tax deduction?
If they were operating as a sole physician, yes.
If they're operating as a sole physician, then they would have that tax available.
Correct. And that's
but if they combined all their operations into one, they only have the one.
That's right. They share it
for the company the corporation as a whole.
Right. So in groups which are, as I said earlier, on the small end, short end, 10, up the high end, 100. Many groups are in the 20 to 30, 35.
Let me ask you the question this way. From your point of view, and I think I know your answer before you answer it, but from your point of view, are these various doctors from various fields coming together in this corporation for a tax benefit or for the betterment of health care?
Clearly for patient care. But
don't take his word for it. These things coalesced. No, do take his word for it. It was groups coalesce even before there was any benefit. It was for the benefit of patients and for the patient of healthcare delivery.
Well, we'll ask the Canadian Medical Association will be on next, I know, but I would like to know what is a rough figure in terms of tax consequences. I mean, if you are suggesting that people would move out of the country, that to me would be a serious matter. I also know that this place does operate in silos. Sometimes one department doesn't understand what the other department is thinking. But in any event, it is, I hear what you're saying. Thank you all for your presentations. We will adjourn in a minute. To members, while we're suspended between panels, could members confirm with the clerk in what language, English, French, or both, that you want your copies, your watermarked copies of the pre-budget consultation draft in, so that they can get that done in the language of your choice. So we will suspend for 5 minutes. could we get started? All right, we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Quickly, we're missing a couple of members. All right. The most important ones are here, is what you're saying, Mr. Leipert. Okay, if we could start. I think everyone heard my introduction before. We're dealing with C-29. Second Act to implement certain provisions of the budget tabled in Parliament on March 22nd. First witness will be the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, Mr. Woodrick.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. As you said, my name is Aaron Woodrick. I'm the Federal Director of the Canadian Taxpayers Federation. Very pleased to appear this evening to comment on Bill C-29, which of course contains various provisions to implement aspects of the 2016 federal budget. At 244 pages, it's a rather voluminous bill, and so rather than even attempt a micro-level analysis of it, I just wanted to touch on a few measures that the CTF in particular takes a view on, specifically the indexation of the childcare benefits, anti-tax avoidance measures, and just a comment on the government's overall attempts to simplify what is a very complex tax code. The Taxpayers Federation supports the government's modification of the UCCB into the new means-tested Canada Child Benefit. Our only concern about this measure was the total cost of it, which specifically that it was presented during the election campaign as part of a package of measures which was supposed to pay for itself, but ultimately ended up costing more than advertised. In this sense, I'd actually suggest it's a miniature version of the government's overall fiscal situation. That said, we do support indexation generally. And I note that the Taxpayers Federation was one of the vocal groups that advocated for the elimination of bracket creep for income taxes, whereby individuals were pushed into higher income tax brackets just because of inflation. And that Paul Martin, when he was finance minister in 2000, implemented this in the 2000 federal budget. But while that measure was designed to protect taxpayers from higher tax brackets, the CCB indexation, by contrast, because it is an entitlement, will lock in a higher expenditure level. And we think that this is ill-advised given that the government is already spending more than it had planned to on this measure. With respect to the anti-tax avoidance provisions, the Taxpayers Federation applauds these measures to clarify the law. We strongly oppose tax evasion and believe those who break the law should face the full force of the law. But we should also be absolutely clear about the potential effect of eliminating so-called gray areas, since if these loopholes, which have effectively functioned as safety valves to lower the overall tax burden, and the practical effect of eliminating those loopholes is to raise the overall effective tax burden, we should be honest about the potential impact there. I know not everyone in this panel might agree, but we would argue that raising taxes is not a good way to boost economic growth, which of course we know is one of this government's central objectives. The last thing I just wanted to touch on was the simplification of the tax code. I think it's safe to say that concern about the excessive complexity of our tax code cuts across the political spectrum. As of this year's tax filing date, the Income Tax Act was over 1 million words long and would take the average person 59 hours to read nonstop. To give you an idea of how long this is, Leo Tolstoy's epic war novel War and Peace is only 587,000 words. So by contrast, the Income Tax Act is about 2 War and Peaces long. So I really think we do need to look at ways of making the tax code simpler. We can always debate what the right level of taxation should be. Of course, our group will always be there arguing lower is better, but whatever we settle on, I think we should be looking to try and find simpler, more effective ways to raise the same amount of revenue. I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Woodrick. Mr. Schnapp.
Thank you. My name is Marshall Schnapp. I'm the Ombudsman for ADR Chambers, and we're the external complaints body that RBC, TD, and DC Bank use. I don't have any specific comments on the bill, but I would say that in terms of what the legislation does for external complaints bodies is current with our practices, and in a lot of it codifies a lot of what was in the regulation. I'm also here, obviously, for any questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. The Canadian Labour Congress, Ms. McEwen.
Hi, thank you. I'm here on behalf of the 3.5 million members of the Canadian Labour Congress. I want to thank you for the opportunity to present our views on Bill C-29. The CLC brings together Canada's national and international unions, along with the provincial and territorial federations of labour, and 130 district labour councils whose members work in virtually all sectors of the Canadian economy, in all occupations in all parts of Canada. Just like my colleague from the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, I'm going to touch on just two parts of this bill because it was very long. In Part 1, Section 43, Paragraph 1, it amends Section 122.61 of the Income Tax Act, indexing the Canada Child Benefit to inflation, but only starting in July 2020. The Canada Child Benefit replaced the Universal Child Care Benefit, which was taxable and not indexed, the Canada Child Tax Benefit, which was not taxable and indexed to inflation, and the National Child Benefit Supplement, which was also not taxable and was indexed to inflation. So the Canada Child Benefit was introduced, came into effect as of July 2016. It is not taxable like the two of the previous three, and not indexed to inflation like the UCCB. It simplified the other three programs, and it better targeted this benefit to low-income families. So it was widely very popular, and one of the things that the Canadian Labour Congress pointed to as a success that would lift children out of poverty. The maximum benefit under the old system for if you had one child under 6 would be $5,700 for this year. The new CCB gives those families an extra $650 a year for that child. This is a considerable amount of money if you're in low income. But since the CCTB and NCB were indexed to CPI, this advantage shrinks to only $190 in 2020. It is inexplicable that a benefit aimed at reducing child poverty would be allowed to erode by so much in such a short period. An alternative to keep costs down would be to phase the benefit out earlier. Right now, two-child families with incomes of up to $200,000 still receive some benefits. That's also inexplicable that we're allowing, because we're not indexing either the $30,000 or the $65,000 as people's incomes rise, they'll grow out of those groups. So in order to keep benefits for fairly wealthy families. Part 4, Division 1 introduces a definition of suitable employment into the Employment Insurance Act. This definition was previously spelled out in EI regulations and in the Digest of Benefit Entitlement Principles. Most of the definition from the EI regulations has been moved into legislation, but some part of it is specifically missing. First of all, the health and physical capabilities that allow workers to commute and perform the work, that's no longer a factor in considering suitable employment. That the hours of work are not incompatible with family obligations or religious convictions. So that's quite significant if you are offered, say, a night shift, but you have a child in school. Do you have to take that night shift, or can you say that that's not suitable employment? Most of us have to be accommodated for our family situation, and it would be incongruent if EI did not also accommodate us for our family situations. And the third thing that's no longer included in the definition of suitable employment is that the nature of work is not contrary to moral convictions or religious beliefs. So these were in EI Regulation 9.002, Paragraph 1. The definition in Bill C-29 is otherwise the same as EI Regulation 9.002, Paragraphs 2 and 3. I'm wondering if this was an oversight or if it was intentional. Given that the Social Security Tribunal relies heavily on years of jurisprudence from the Board of Referees and the umpire, we're likely to get more consistent decisions if we can stick to the established definition, and people will have more consistent outcomes. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ms. McEwen. Canadian Medical Association, Mr. Feely and Mr. Davies.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm John Feely, Vice President of Member Relevance at the Canadian Medical Association. I'm joined here today by Dr. Rick Davies, who is a professor in the Division of Cardiology at the University of Ottawa Heart Institute and managing partner of the Associates in Cardiology Group Medical Structure. Let me first thank the members of the committee for recognizing the risks to health delivery posed by the proposed changes in Bill C-29, affecting group medical structures, and inviting the CMA to appear before you as part of your study of this important legislation. The CMA watched your first meeting on this bill with great interest. As part of my remarks today, I'll address the questions posed by the committee during that meeting. Since the release of this proposal in the 2016 budget, it has become increasingly clear to the CMA that Finance Canada is vastly underestimating the risks to medical group structures. I'm here today to clarify the risks that they are real. If this proposal applies to group medical structures, there will be a negative impact on medical research, physician training, and the delivery of specialty care in Canada. Group medical structures are prevalent within academic health science centers and among certain specialty groups, as we heard earlier, notably among radiology, cardiology, anesthesiology, medical oncology. The CMA estimates that about 10,000 to 15,000 physicians are incorporated in these group medical structures. This team-based care is essential for educating and training medical students and residents in teaching hospitals and for conducting medical research. Unlike other professions, group medical structures have not been formed for taxation or commercial purposes. Also, unlike other professions, physician compensation is set by negotiations with provinces and is based on the existing tax framework. Group medical structures were formed to deliver on provincial and territorial health priorities, primarily in the academic health setting, such as teaching, medical research, as well as optimizing the delivery of patient care. Maintaining the current framework for the small business deduction is critical to the continued viability of these structures. It is critical that the committee understand that the Finance Canada is significantly underestimating the impacts to group medical structures. Changing the eligibility to the small business deduction will have a significantly larger implication than simply the 4.5% difference in the small business versus general rate at the federal level, as suggested by the department. With no practical way for the provinces to use a different definition, the combined tax rate increase would be as high as 17.5%. As a result, this federal tax change would establish a strong disincentive to practice within the impacted structures. While we recognize Finance Canada's validation of cost-sharing arrangements, this is unlikely to resolve the concerns we're raising today, because we're talking about pooled income and reallocation of revenue amongst a group practice. The CMA is also aware that the department developed financial impact scenarios that show the net impact will be in the hundreds of dollars. While unfortunately we were not afforded access to this analysis, it is our position that these results are not an accurate portrayal of the impact of this federal tax proposal. To demonstrate this case, the CMA worked closely with MD Financial Management to develop real financial scenarios based on real financial information from two typical incorporated physicians in group medical structures. MD Financial Management is a subsidiary of the CMA, providing financial management services to Canada's doctors. This real financial calculation revealed annual net reduction of funds of $32,500 and $18,000 for each of these physicians respectively. Projecting forward, when extended to all incorporated members of each physician's group structure, this would represent a negative impact of $39.4 million and $13.4 million based on a 20-year time frame and 4.8% rate of return. In closing, I would like to underscore the importance this issue has to healthcare delivery. Since the release of the budget, the CMA has received an unprecedented level of correspondence from physicians expressing their grave concerns with the federal proposal. To date, we've been copied on over 1,800 submissions to the Finance Canada, the Finance Minister, and to members of this committee. In comparison, when we informed our members of the increase to the top personal taxation rate, we did not receive one message, not one single message. When we surveyed physicians, they confirmed the concerns we had heard regarding these specific proposals. 61% of respondents indicated that the group structure would dissolve. 3/4 said that other partners would leave the group practice. Almost 80% said the tax proposal would lead to reduced investments in medical research by their group. And over 2/3 said that the tax proposal would limit the ability to provide medical training spots. I thank the committee again for inviting the CMA to appear during your study of Bill C-29. And I strongly encourage the committee to adopt CMA's recommendation to exempt group medical structures as the only means of avoiding this negative and unintended consequence. Dr. Davies and I would be pleased to address any questions you may have. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much. Canadian Centre for Elder Law, Ms. Watts.
Thank you very much. We are a national research and law reform institute. We focus exclusively on issues associated with law and aging. We are independent, nonpartisan, and non-political. And we're very honored to present to you today. I wanted to lead by saying that while we are not an advocacy-based organization, we have had the privilege of reviewing some of the submissions from the Public Interest Advocacy Centre and the Foundation for Advancement of Rights, FAIR Canada, and we agree with many of those provisions. But I'm going to focus today on three things. The first is I'm going to try to bring the voice of older people to the table when we review both the OAS and looking at some of the code provisions with regards to financial services. Second, I'm going to bring to the table in particular the voice of older women and how older women are disproportionately negatively affected, and that information is not well reflected in the provisions available in the Budget Committee that you have looked so far. And the last is I'm going to focus very specifically on Section 19 of the OAS with regards to payment allowance of pensioner's spouse or common law partner. So to begin, I think it's important to reflect that financial services are not dealing with the overarching reality of Canada's aging population. We have the largest demographic shift in the history of humankind, and we have the largest intergenerational transfer of wealth in Canadian history. And financial services, and with great respect, many of the provisions reflected in the document before us for consideration do not adequately reflect the real needs of Canadians to make sure that financial services are responsive to both the aging population, the transfer of wealth, and indeed to make sure that services are accessible, make sense, and deal with the realities of cognitive impairment that we see. In a 2016 study that we participated in reviewing financial elder abuse in particular, we know that 2.6% of all Canadians are subject to financial elder abuse. It's hundreds of millions of dollars. And what we know is many people are becoming more old and many people are becoming more cognitively impaired. And we know that financial services do not have established training to deal with that. With regards to the complaint mechanisms that we've seen proposed, they're enormously confusing for older people and families. They don't know how to go to a variety of resources. They don't know how to manage this Ombuds internal services with the financial institutions. They perceive that there are gaps with regards to the services that they have in terms of insurance. With respect, we hear time and time again that older people and family members simply are not being well served by financial institutions, and that the dispute resolution mechanisms are inadequate in this regard. I want to bring together the voice of older women. We just finished a population consult for 3 years with older women of diverse populations, including Indigenous populations. And some of the voices are these. They have to raise our pensions. They have to raise OAS. It's not enough. We cannot eat. If you're earning half as much as a man, then you're only able to contribute half of your pension. We save for an RRSP, but it's not meeting our needs when we're old. Aging is a man's world. Women are starving. And when we reflect at how negatively proportioned women are served by OAS, we appreciate the changes that are being made to the OAS and appreciate that they have been brought upwards, but there are significant impacts for older women, particularly that they are the poorest group in all Canada. The CPP, to which most people living in Canada contribute through paid employment, provides a pension based on a lifetime of pensionable earnings. And when you see that older people are aging through, and particularly older women are aging through the life course, the dropouts that they have with regards to caregiving means that older women in particular live in poverty. The last piece I wanted to raise was a very narrow point of Section 19 in the OAS, and it is an issue with regards to how the attribution of people who are forced to separate are concluded. And in particular, this section deals with people who may be forced to separate because of things like jail and so on. What we hear time and time again is that people are forced to separate because of care needs, particularly into retirement homes and nursing homes. And there is no presumption that that kind of separation would be included in this. So with great respect, there should be clarity that when people are forced to separate through health and care needs, that it's not accidentally captured by this provision. I'm happy to speak further on a number of aspects, but those are my initial comments.
Thank you very much, Ms. Watts. Turning to the first round, 7 minutes, Mr. Ouellette. 7 minutes.
Wow, I don't know what I'm going to do with all that time. That's incredible. I think it's the first time in my life, Mr. Chair.
You'll certainly figure out a way, I'm sure.
Using up my time. I'd just like to talk about the Canada Child Benefit with Ms. McEwen from the Canadian Labour Congress. So I agree, there is the Canada Child Benefit actually did have a really great impact, but I was wondering if you realized that that there are other issues. For instance, if you're a child in Child and Family Services and you're placed in care of the state, that monies actually don't go, often many provinces roll that money back away from you. And I was wondering if you were aware of that.
Yes, I know that there was a campaign, child welfare groups were campaigning to get the provinces to not claw that money back from parents on social assistance. But I'm not
just
sure.
not social assistance. It's actually, for instance, if you're in Child and Family
I
Services.
don't know where it was. I haven't heard what the resolution is for children in care.
Yeah, so the children in care, apparently, in many provinces, what actually occurs is the provinces will roll back many of the funds. And so, for instance, the most at need children who often might end up aging out of the system and end up on the streets or trying to go to university or college with no family supports or services, who should probably have a certain kitty of money in order to support themselves through RESPs or something, don't actually have those funds or those family supports that they would normally have, but they don't also have their Canada Child Benefit, which was taken by the province that they find themselves in. So I find it's, anyways, I encourage you to look more into it, because I think it's not just a problem of the federal government, it's a problem of all governments across this country. And then I guess my final questions are for Mr. Schnapp. Rated to Ombuds Office. I was just wondering if you could describe your level of independence versus the institutions that you represent.
Sure. How we're structured, I think, allows us to be independent. I mean, first of all, we go by the Ombuds standards, which impartiality and independence are part of. We also have investigators, and we review all of the matters. We have discretion when it comes to intake. We also have discretion when it comes to what files to deal with, even if they haven't, let's say, they're not in time to make the complaint. And we provide, when we do reach a decision, that draft decision is given to whichever party we've decided against, and then they have an opportunity to make comments, so that goes both ways. As well, how we're set up is if a bank doesn't agree with what we do, we'll publish the report on our website. And more often than, I don't think we've ever had to do that because the banks do defer to our ultimate recommendation.
So a previous witness here said that what the Act had in Division 6 under complaints wasn't robust enough in order to deal with the complaints. I was just wondering if you could, is the new changes that we're putting in place going to allow you to still hold banks to account for their activities if they trample the rights of a bank holder or a citizen?
I didn't see anything in the new act that would change that. Unfortunately, I wasn't here to hear the comments. I'm not sure if there was something specific. I'd be more than happy to address it. But if anything, we see what was in the regulation now being codified in the law. So I don't see any change in that regard.
So his comment was that essentially the banks get to choose their own ombudsman, meaning the control then rests with the bank over the ombudsman, and their potential is there as a level of conflict of interest.
Well, I think with any independent body, there are two different ombuds people, and I think our work is pretty transparent, and I think our methodology is pretty transparent. Part of, I guess, the challenge is there aren't that many service providers that are offering this. But I, in my experience as an ombudsman, as an investigator, I've never, I haven't had the experience where the bank was trying to unduly influence us, or also respects our role. So I think that's the model that's in place. I don't see it like that, but
that's okay. I'm not.
Sure.
I'm not criticizing. I'm just
No,
asking a few questions. And then just a little tiny follow-up. If you actually make a ruling against a bank, what enforcement does that have?
Okay,
how powerful is that, I guess, in their relations with the public or something?
Okay, so an ombudsman has the power of persuasion, has the power of public relations, as it were. We would post that. I think that would. I think banks are very sensitive to the idea that they're publicly told that their decisions are wrong. Having said that, we can't. We can enforce a recommendation in that if it's not followed through, we publish. We're also a dispute resolution tool. So if a party gets a recommendation, it's not followed, while we can't enforce it like a court, they have that information to take it to another body as they see fit to try to have it enforced.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
You got no other questions? Wow, that's unusual.
Incredible.
Mr. Deldel.
Incredible.
No, but you can ask the bench.
Pardon?
Mr. Lippert.
Oh, Mr. Lippert. Okay, you're away.
Thank you. Mr. Schnapp, I love short presentations, but I think in the time I've been here, yours was the shortest. So that was. So I'd like to just learn a little bit more about. I didn't know you existed. It's
Sure.
not you as an individual, but your office. How does if I understand your role, it is to resolve disputes between the customer and the bank.
Correct. So
how does the customer know about you?
So the customer knows about us through the bank's complaint handling system. What all customers are advised is if they have an issue with the bank, first they have to go to, the person you're dealing with, then the manager, customer care, and then finally the bank ombuds. Now, if the bank ombuds doesn't resolve their complaint to their satisfaction, they're provided notice that's saying we have an external complaint body. So whether it's us or OBSI, they're told who to go to and how they could access us. So they can access us over the phone, over email, letter, and then we also have a website as well. So we explain how our system works.
What would be your most common kind of complaint or resolution?
Our most common resolution?
No, well, what would be the thing that you would handle the most? What kind of complaint?
Sure. I guess there are different categories. I mean, one could be just customer service. People are unhappy with how they were, let's say, treated, or if they feel they were treated unfairly. We also deal a fair bit with mortgages. If people want to end their mortgage early, a lot of people aren't aware of prepayment penalties, or termination penalties. We also have fraud issues. People feel sometimes people will have their card, be it their debit card, their Visa card, and they believe that these transactions they shouldn't be responsible for, and sometimes the bank says that they should.
Okay.
Those are some of the complaints.
Canadian Medical Association, I'll spare my colleagues across the way my tirade about liberal taxation policy, but I'd like to get a little bit more understanding of the current situation. So, and we've certainly heard from the radiologists and understand that, but can you tell me, so my doctor's in a group of half a dozen doctors that practice in a clinic together. How are they currently taxed?
Perhaps I can take that one. I'll speak to our group at Heart Institute, and I guess specifically academic groups.
Okay.
So first, we formed a legal partnership in 1976, and while it's a partnership, it wasn't to make money. Really, what we did is we're supporting what we call the academic mission. So right now we do a lot of research. We're actually becoming better and better recognized for that. We have the top-rated teaching program in the country. We get some of the best cardiology trainees in the country for that reason. We also do clinical care. Some of it's well paid, some of it's poorly paid. So for example, we've recruited from somebody who was described to me when we recruited the person as the best cardiologist in Australia. But she takes care of patients who are very sick. If you have a heart transplantation, she's the person who's going to be looking after you. That's very poorly remunerated. In order to be able to recruit excellent people like this, what we need to do is need to be able to adjust. So what we've done with our partnership is essentially been able to maintain excellence in all areas. Research, which we fund almost all of it. Clinical care of poorly funded things, which we essentially redistribute so we can keep these excellent people. And teaching, which is completely unfunded, but we spend our time doing this because we think it's important to have researchers and doctors for the future.
Okay, so you're going to be impacted by this change.
We're going to be impacted tremendously.
Okay, but you are a teaching group. I'm
Yes.
interested in, if you're not a teaching group, you're just 6 doctors in a partnership practicing in a clinic that runs a small business. Are they going to be impacted by this?
I've spent a lot, they'll be impacted in the short term. I've spent a lot of time, more time than I like, talking with lawyers and accountants about this.
Well, no, but I'm just trying to get clarity.
I'll answer your question. Yes, they'll be affected. However, if they're likely a cost-sharing arrangement, and so they may be using a legal partnership out of convenience in order to share costs, in which case it'll be a pain in the neck for them. They can reconfigure at a lot of expense, and they make it a somewhat less efficient mechanism for doing the same thing. But because those partnerships in general build a provincial government as individuals, they don't have to be a partnership to make money. So the purpose of their partnership really is to share costs, and it's a way of convenience.
So they wouldn't be impacted?
They would be impacted in that they would have to reconfigure, but unlike us, the reconfiguration would be a whole lot easier.
Okay, but it's just not teaching partnerships at universities that are being impacted?
That's correct.
Okay.
It's just not teaching
I
partnerships.
still got a little bit of time?
I would say that teaching partnerships are being selectively and more severely
Understand.
impacted.
Yep, understand that. I want a quick question to the Canadian taxpayers. Have you had any indication? I happen to be talking to 3 individuals during our break week, all very high income. And each one of them said to me that if Trump reduces personal income tax rates in the states for the highest earners, they are all going to declare U.S. residents for taxation purposes. Have you heard anything along that line?
Not from our supporters specifically. I think you raise an important point, that is tax competitiveness matters. I mean, you can't simply look at your own tax policy. The fact is we live in a global world, and whether or not we like what happens in the United States, they are our biggest trading partner, our closest neighbor, and we have to be cognizant of that with all of our tax policy.
Okay, thank you both. Mr. Caron, 7 minutes.
Merci beaucoup et merci encore.
Thank you very much. Thank you to all of the witnesses. I will begin with the Canadian Medical Association, and I'll wait for you to put your earpieces on. Thank you. So just to be clear, the bill affects partnerships more specifically in the medical profession. A doctor who, I don't know, could you give me an example of doctors who've incorporated themselves as a small business who would be impacted upon by this provision?
Which is not as good. Well, as I said, we've incorporated ourselves as, I guess, a small business. We're 35 cardiologists. What will happen with our group is that, in particular for some of our groups, I have to deal with, as a managing partner, a fourfold difference in earning ability from people whose training is about the same.
Je pense que j'ai mal posé ma question. Dans votre
I think I misspoke. In your case, it's a partnership between 35 practitioners, but a doctor in a private clinic, for example, who set it up himself. Does he have access at present to that small business deduction?
Dans votre recommandation,
In your recommendation, you mentioned that the exemption should be granted for partnerships only. So in the end, what you're saying is that doctors who are in clinics, who aren't in partnerships, might indeed see their ability to access this small business deduction eliminated. They would no longer benefit from it. Am I mistaken?
I might misunderstand you, but I think yes. As I understand it, somebody who's in small private practice by themselves has access to the small business deduction. If he's in a partnership,
but they would lose,
he will lose it.
But with this bill, they would still have access to the deduction. I'm trying to understand.
Yes, if I'm a solo.
So it's only the partnerships that will lose it.
If I'm a solo practitioner, this is my problem as an academic doctor. If I have a young cardiologist in front of me who's interested in pursuing a career in, if you like, higher end medicine, if he just goes and becomes a solo practitioner and, if you like, a jack of all trades, he has access to the small business deduction. If he joins my group, he loses it. And this is the problem faced by academic centers, is that there's a selective impact so that me, as the representative of an academic group, I cannot recruit those doctors on a level playing field with just somebody in the community who can allow them to practice as a solo practitioner. So it means that essentially it makes it much harder for me to get doctors into the kind of practice that we, and it's very important. It hurts us very badly.
J'essaie de comprendre dans votre perspective de l'intention.
I'm trying to understand the perspective or the intent of the government to go in this direction, because practitioners in partnerships would lose the ability to access this small business tax rate, but not practitioners who work in a clinic. So, in other words, professionals shouldn't access this because in the end, it's nearly the equivalent thing as a salary. It's not just imposing restrictions on partnerships, but it would also involve individual practitioners. Could you explain to me why one category is impacted upon and not the other?
They're all essentially in a small business, right? So some are solo business practitioners, some are in a group where they're sharing costs, and some have actually set up partnerships because they're pooling their income or revenue to accomplish the academic mission and clinical mission. And so with the proposal, would only impact those that are pooling their income to undertake teaching and research and the broad specialty or specialized service group. The others are not actually impacted by the proposal in the current bill. And so that's what we're seeking, an exemption for those that would be negatively impacted.
Merci beaucoup. Je vais passer à Mme McEwen.
Thank you very much, Ms. McEwen. With regard to employment insurance, the government seems to be reestablishing the definition of unsuitable or suitable employment that was abolished by the Conservatives in 2012. It remains that there are some elements that, to my mind, remain arbitrary with regard to definitions. For example, the government can decide that an employment that is not suitable for a certain period of time can become once again a suitable employment. And if it's refused, the person involved might lose his or her benefits. And when I asked the officials what the time frame was for an unsuitable job to become suitable, I was told 2 or 3 months. And I was told it was also the case before 2012. Is that your perception of the situation? And how can an unsuitable job we're not qualified for become a suitable job we're qualified for so quickly?
After a period of time that they deemed a reasonable amount of time, if you can't find work at your old level, that you would have to accept work at a lower level. And it was also my understanding that this was not evenly applied throughout the country, that it was almost at the discretion of staff who were hearing the case. So there wasn't a single standard, which is unfortunate. But that changing that now, going back, I think is going to create a lot of problems, especially with the Social Security Tribunal, which is very problematic as well.
Thank you both. Mr. Sabera.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and welcome everybody, and thank you for your testimony. I'm actually going to start with Canadian Centre for Elder Law. I don't want to mispronounce your last name, so I apologize if I do. The question of elder care or our graying population, obviously our government has done a number of things to help these individuals out. We increased the guaranteed income supplement, almost $1,000. We reversed the old age and GIS eligibility, where the Conservatives have put it to 67, and we reversed it to 65. We still have the seniors benefit index that we're working on, which was in our platform. So we've done a number of things to help seniors out, and I would love for you to comment on that. One of the things that I would like to see maybe in the future, because we've also enhanced the CPP, which for future generations is going to be a great thing, is the potential for changing the next go around of CPP discussions on the 60% to 100% level, which would allow, if your spouse passes away, your benefits to go from 60% to 100% of the other spouse, but still maintaining the cap. And that has been talked a lot about, a very effective measure in the future to reduce poverty for seniors. If you can comment on that.
Thank you. I'll take the last piece first. The Canadian Centre for Elder Law is a research and law reform institute, so it's important that we say we don't do advocacy. Having said that, the last comment is certainly one that we've looked at. It would be a significant benefit to older people, and particularly older women, because older women do still outlive older men. And the predominant number, 26% of older women in Canada, live exclusively on CPP and OAS, as opposed to about 17% of older men. So it's a significant increase. Having said that, with great respect, this is the only government that it's not been appointed a federal minister responsible for seniors. And it is great concern to both, I think, the Canadian population at large, as well as folks who work in the field responsible for aging, that there is no place to go to look at issues responsible for seniors. So I know that that would be an area of great interest to ensure a minister responsible for seniors, as past governments have done so as well.
Thank you for your commentary. To the CMA, hearing your presentation and the presentation before by the radiologists, I've been grappling with this issue. So I want to ask it in this context. The current structure for group structures, and I belong to the CICA User Accounter Standards Board. I've sat on it for a number of years, obviously don't do it now. So I'm looking at this from a tax treatment perspective. It is advantageous for the group structure to be in place for specialists, for doctors, for radiologists, and so forth. I get that. The link towards if the structure is no longer allowed to be utilized, the eligibility is no longer there, having a detrimental impact on healthcare. I want to hear your opinion, and I think, so I'm trying to, the tax consequences versus the healthcare. If you can tie it, great. If you can't, I just want to hear some more color around that, please.
I can speak to that. In academic centers, in order to get, if you like, your top tier of health care, what happens is we encourage our doctors to specialize in often very narrow fields. And so I mentioned a doctor who takes care of patients who need cardiac assist devices and heart transplants. This is unlike what I'll call a community cardiologist who tends to do a broader range of activities. So if you've got an individual practicing in the community, he'll do some things that are highly remunerative, some that he loses money on, and on the average things work out okay. In order to deliver that absolute top tier of healthcare, what we have to do is encourage people to spend all of their time doing activities that they become very, very excellent at. And this is how you can get the really top tier of care. Without academic groups and the ability to function in academic groups, we can't do that, because essentially there are some activities in which nobody could ever be able to make a decent living, and so we need to support them. And truth be told, and there's some people who are in very highly remunerative activities, and they are willing to support their equally well-trained colleagues because they realize that essentially the provincial billing often got it wrong. You know, if they got the billing right, possibly not. But what we've done is functioned over the years in order to make sure that we can maintain this level of excellence. And so what we do is we maintain groups like this. You'll lose that level of excellence if we lose the ability to form these academic partnerships.
And my concern is this. A number of years ago, I purchased a home. I purchased a home off of an individual who was a thoracic surgeon, who was trained in Canada, and who had worked in Canada for a bit, but who had received 2 job offers, one to remain in Canada and one to move to Massachusetts. He's now been in Massachusetts for many years, and he took it for many reasons, and taxation wasn't one of them, but I think it was a little bit of lifestyle, opportunity for advancement. So I do understand people are mobile, capital is mobile, so I do want to look at the impact on healthcare, if there is one, or if there will be one.
Yes, so it just goes back to the survey that we did of our members, and I think one of the disturbing findings that we didn't anticipate in the survey was the response from medical residents, that if they did not see an opportunity within group structures, that they would leave, and so they would make it would have a steering influence, if you will, on their decision where to practice. It might be in the community, but it's also a global market for research and clinical service provision. So I think that we believe that it will have an impact. We've been told, I just had a call not that long ago, but with a large group of 150 physicians that are looking at dissolving their partnership. So that will have a real impact. They themselves contribute millions of dollars out of their own pocket to support medical research, in addition to teaching, in addition to ensuring a vast array of specialty care services are available. So I believe, based on anecdotal evidence, but also survey evidence, that it will have an impact.
Okay, sorry, your time's up, Mr. Hell.
Thank you.
This provision hurts a key structure within your medical schools badly. I can't imagine how, if you hurt your medical schools, that you're not going to hurt healthcare, both currently and certainly in the future.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Deltel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ladies, gentlemen, be welcome in your House of Commons. J'aimerais d'abord faire quelques réflexions.
First of all, I have some thoughts on tax reductions that are being proposed in the current budget. Lower taxes, lower income tax. As you know, Mr. Chair, This was supposed to be done to be cost neutral. That's what had been proposed to the citizenry. Unfortunately, the numbers don't add up because it's costing $3.5 billion more than what had been counted on. This is going to affect a large number of Canadians, but it should be understood that 65% of workers will not be affected by the tax reductions because those who earn $45,000 and less are not affected at all by this. The greatest beneficiaries of these lower taxes are those who earn between $140,000 and $200,000, and I confess a conflict of interest because I'm part of this tax bracket like my colleagues here. If we were to talk about the middle class benefiting the most, I would say that at $145,000, we're not really part of the middle class anymore. Earlier, we were laughing somewhat because we mentioned that it was supposed to be the wealthiest who were going to pay for this, but essentially the wealthiest might decide to leave. Some laughed about it, but there's a significant danger linked to this because I know what I'm talking about. In Quebec, when there were movements about 40 years ago that led to higher taxes and higher rates for businesses that were among the wealthiest, that led to many departures. And the most effective demonstration was Toronto. Take Toronto 40 years ago versus Montreal 40 years ago, and compare that to today. You'll see that there's one city that benefited more than the other because tax rates were lower in one area compared to the other. Some people can be strongly tempted, without necessarily going into tax avoidance, to benefit from a better tax situation. A member from Montreal for 7 years, even though this person represented Montreal, preferred to pay their taxes in Ontario because they preferred living in Ontario instead of Montreal, even though they were representing Montreal in order to save $6,000. Yes, it happens that people will move to avoid paying taxes and income taxes, and these lowered tax rates do not necessarily benefit those that we think will benefit from it. And this is often done with a substantial loss, which is $3.4 billion. Those who built this program forgot a detail, which was indexation 5 years after the implementation of that model. We have to be careful when we laugh a little too soon, Mr. Chair. My question is for the Canadian Taxpayer Federation, Mr. Woodrick. Please be welcome to your committee, to your House of Commons.
As you know, there is a huge task to the small businesses with the new liberal carbon tax, with the new Canadian pension plan fees that will increase, and also with the fact that we still have a high tax rate instead of lowering it as it was proposed and during the last electoral campaign. So for sure we're talking about business, but when business faces those new reality, it has an impact of working people. So on behalf of your concern, do you think that there is a big issue for taxpayer to see those new taxes, Canadian pension plan with new fees, a liberal carbon tax, and also the fact that the business have a high rate to pay for taxation?
Yeah, I think this debate will never be fully settled, and that's why our group is out here advocating that lower taxes are better for the economy. I think it's important in this case to not just focus on a single tax measure, but the aggregate of all the measures that this government is introducing. They are talking about a new carbon tax. As you mentioned, CPP premiums, while people point out that the people who pay them receive some benefit down the road, for the point of view of a business, it is a new cost that is introduced and they have to bear it. They were anticipating a cut to the small business rate. They are not receiving it. So when you start to add all these things up, it does sort of work against the government's stated objective of boosting the economy. It's hard to see how increasing costs of business is more likely to stimulate more economic activity.
Well, thank you. Now my question will be to Madame Tamblyn Watts for the Canadian Centre of Elder Law. Madame, be welcome in your House of Commons. We talk about Canadian pension plan, so this is a real purpose, but we're talking for long term. It will take 40 years before having the true effect of all of that. So how do you think this will affect the people that you represent here?
Merci bien pour l'invitation.
Thank you for the invitation.
OAS, and I'll put the two of them together because they are so inextricably linked in how we do it. We would like to flag a few key issues. The first is that it disproportionately costs people who are poor more than the actuarial amount that they get back from it. And so there's excellent actuarial science to indicate that CPP and OAS payments paying into that by people who are quite poor, it doesn't balance out on the other end. So it is a concern, a structural concern of institutionalized poverty and gender concerns around that as well. So that's the first piece. The second piece is it disproportionately can negatively affect immigrant populations. So as many of you will know, you need to have a number of different qualifications in order to get your CPP and OAS, and that does affect in the long term. So you need to pay in for 40 years, or for partial benefits, 10 years, and be 59 while living in Canada. And what we know is that over the life course, people who are in immigrant populations to Canada are significantly poorer as they age as a result of that. It's not well indexed to support the fact that Canada is a population which is welcoming its diversity in immigrants, but we need to rethink about it in a longer term. It does not currently reflect a positive outlook for finances for older people who come to Canada.
I guess we've got Ms. McConnell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you all for coming. I just wanted to start off here as well with Ms. Tamblin-Watts. In terms of women being most negatively impacted, you said something that I found really interesting. You said men are aging and women are starving. So this gap, and I understand that, but the fact that women actually live longer might also be increasing the impacts in the sense that they have to survive with less longer. And obviously, the longer you live, maybe your health might not be as good. So how do we deal with that in terms of, or would you recommend when we're looking at the OAS and these changes, outside of this, as my colleague pointed to some of the other work that still needs to be done as part of our platform commitment, but in terms of that gender lens, and how do you not just move the gap forward, but actually shrink that gap?
Thank you so much for the question. When we look across the life course, there's a number of different pieces that we need to pull together. One of them does very much deal with the consumer financial protection aspect that we're talking about today, and one of them I think will also reflect about the OAS and CPP piece. The first is we can charge, and I say charge because that's what you're doing. You're paying into CPP and OAS. You're charging your clients, which are the people who are paying in. You can actually index it to less. So you can look at the actuarial science around the actual cost paid in and paid out. And that hasn't been looked at for many years. So there's an opportunity to bring a gendered lens as to the real cost in and the real cost out. The second piece could be quite simple. Under certain qualifications, we could actually give women, particularly single women who are the poorest population in Canada as a broad group, we can actually give them more money. Or you can offset it by looking at caregiving dropout provisions, which are similar to my colleague was talking about the child tax benefit. There are tools to reflect the life course caregiving challenges, which are not yet used as revenue tools or concessions to revenue tools, if you will. So we certainly can look at ways across the life course. Particularly, we know that older women are also caring for other older women, other men, and people across the life course. So as they age, caregiving is not concluded. So we can look at some of those analogous tools to child tax benefits, looking at those for caregiving provisions. The last piece I will say is, and I was reflecting to our colleague from ADR Chambers here, I know that in conversations with the Ombudsman for Banking Services and Investments, they've indicated that 50 to 70% of their cases deal with older people. 50 to 70% of the cases at the Ombudsman for Banking Services, in fact, deal with older people. And so there's a gendered piece in that as well, because proportionately there are more women than men. But interestingly enough, the complaint provisions, the number of people who are bringing forward their complaint, it's fewer women. And I know that it speaks to other research that we have in this area to suggest that women don't necessarily have the same financial literacy opportunities and the same ability to complain or the same relationships with financial institutions. So I see that it's a multivariate approach, but there are really positive things that we can do about it.
Thank you. That was helpful. I'm going to move on just because I have limited time, but to the Canadian Medical Association, first I'll say your approach was very balanced and I appreciate it, so well done. And I just want to talk on one piece in terms of, that I didn't get to in the previous either, but you both mentioned it, in terms of that subspecialist, or that really, I think you described it as that, not higher end, but that highest of degree of specialty. And I'm just wondering in your research, and if you've looked at the cost, because you feel that that will really be impacted, these really specialized people, doctors, that programs that provinces are doing. So for example, in Ontario, there's something called eConsult, where you're actually delivering those specialties outside of just that business group. And you can now, rural communities, for example, can now access that type of subspecialist. So have you modeled in these calculations the fact that not only is there still incentives, financial incentives for these type of specialists, but you can actually get that out to larger areas through technology than just your business group?
Yeah, I think that's an excellent question. We've been working on trying to, at our institute, obviously make e-consults available. We also spend a lot of time doing traditional, if you like, for free telephone consults in this. We're the biggest consulting area. There's no question that our ability to share income across the group makes this possible. In general, if you look at the economics of e-consults, it's something that we want to do for sure. But if you include office costs and all of that, e-consults really are one of the things that we would be encouraging. But actually, essentially, it would be a money loser. But it's valuable, and it's something that we should be doing. So group structures like ours really will encourage things like you're describing so that we can actually make better health care available.
I think you're out of time.
I know. Thank you.
Mr. Elvis.
We appreciate everyone's contribution to our discussions on C29. I'm going to start first with the Canadian Medical Association. Thank you for your briefing note. First, let's talk about within Canada. In your briefing note, there is quite an array of different provincial tax rates. And by removing this small business preferential rate on the first 500,000, that would deeply affect particularly some physicians. You note that in Nova Scotia, it'd be quite a steep increase in taxation. So do you feel that the implementation of this policy may cause a lot of harm to patient care in Nova Scotia as physicians redetermine where they want to practice based on the return?
Yes.
Okay. So in addition to that, you have obviously international. For example, in the interior of British Columbia, we like to joke a lot about South African doctors because first of all, we love them. Why do we love South African doctors? It's because they are willing to come to Canada. They're willing to apply their hard-earned skills, and they love Canada. They love the quality of life. But again, there are, as Mr. Sabera had pointed out earlier, there are many different jurisdictions competing for that international talent. Now, if a physician finds out that that they're given a preferential tax rate in another jurisdiction, will that impact health care and patient care, particularly in Canada?
Yes.
Good. Now, when you did your original, Finance Canada did their own process. Mr. Greywall had mentioned earlier that it ran in hundreds of dollars. And yet, from the modeling you've done, with people very familiar with how group medical, or I should say medically groups work, how did you arrive at between $18,000 and $32,000?
So in that case, well, in both cases, we spoke to actual physicians in these groups. We put them in touch with our people at MD Management, so they worked with accountants to figure out, and tax specialists to figure out what the actual impact would be based on the federal provincial change. And that's how we arrived at that number. So it's just based on actual real financial information.
So, and I appreciate that, but why do you think there is such a disparity between what Finance Canada ran and has given the information that it believes it'll be hundreds of dollars versus thousands of dollars of your members' hard-earned money?
Yeah, so I can't really speak to what Finance Canada's scenarios because they didn't share the details with us, but so we'd be happy to talk to them about that, but we didn't have access to it.
Okay, so if Finance Canada was to sit down with, I think you said FP Medical, the group that did your
MD
model,
Financial,
MP
yes.
Financial, then I'm sure that they would welcome that, so they can compare methodologies.
Indeed.
Okay, well, there's an opening again for the government to take a look at, because we really think that this needs to take a second look. And again, this is a government bill. You know, there's lots of criticisms of the previous government for different things they put in a bill, but I don't believe we ever had something which would affect healthcare, research, patient health as much as it sounds that this will. And I would urge the government to try and fix this, Mr. Chair, because it is their legislation. And if not, then I guess the opposition can look at remedial amendments down the road, but I would encourage them to take a look at that, because there does seem to be this does seem to be, and again, Mr. Leipert had said earlier, this does seem to be an intentional, or I should say, the finance officials believe that there is a disparity. I don't think they're taking into account the social costs that will come with this decision. So I appreciate your work here today. How much time do I have, Mr. Chair?
You've got about 20 seconds.
Okay, I'm just going to go to Mr. Woodrick really quickly. So, Mr. Woodrick, I support a lot of what your organization stands for. I think it's excellent we have independent watchdogs besides opposition. The public needs many voices to look at these kinds of things. But I've heard time and time again we need a simpler tax code. Now, for the majority of Canadians, they're dealing with their own individual situation. They're not dealing with bond strips and international tax evasion schemes that are quite complicated. And yet, when we talk about simplifying the tax code, everyone says we need to make it simpler. Well, technology has made things incredibly simple. In fact, most people can look at a TurboTax and get their things done.
I hate to tell you, but 20 seconds travels
yeah, so I'm just going to leave it to him. I'd just like to ask him the question is, why do you continue? Because there's these other methods that make taxes much easier for people.
Sorry, so is your question, why do we continue to have a more complicated system?
No, why do you continue to advocate for, considering that most of the huge War and Peace, the two albums, is not directed at average Canadians?
Yeah, because I think it's important that a tax would be understandable to the average citizen. We should not have to hire an expert or have software to know what we are eligible for. And when we look at the number of things that are crammed into the tax code, I think there are all types of distortions. There are all types of things that treat certain groups more specially than others. Depending on the government of the day, those groups may be different, but the reality is they are trying to cram in sort of boutique measures, and we think that that's unfair, and we think that that distorts the economy. And if the objective of a tax system is to raise revenue, we should decide how much revenue we want to raise, and then try and find the simplest and most efficient way to do that.
Thank you. Thank you both. Turning to Mr. Greywall.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I also want to thank off by thanking the Taxpayers Federation for keeping elected officials that run for other offices to account. I think you guys are doing a tremendous job and keep that up. Now moving on to the CMA. Sorry, it seems like we're picking on you, but we're really not. You made a comment that this change is going to impact medical schools. Can you elaborate on that a little bit further?
I can speak to it generally, but Dr. Davies works at the University of Ottawa, so he could speak to it more specifically. But
Sure.
basically, what our research is telling us, and what our members have told us, is that they're pooling their resources, and in some cases, they have additional funding coming into the university directed to support teaching. And so there are members of the group that are doing more teaching, some are doing more clinical, some are doing more research, and the pooling of that income allows for to support that activity, and some of which is not remunerated. For example, teaching, in other words, would be by volunteer without that pooling of that income to facilitate those individuals that are teaching. But if I could just ask Dr. Davies to get into maybe a little more specifics.
Sure. I mean, I think you've got it generally correct. Essentially, we don't get paid for the teaching that we do. This is sort of our, if you like, our legacy for the future. And as I say, we've got the top-rated teaching program for cardiology in the country. We spend a lot of time at it. We work at it. We're very proud of it. In general, clinical dollars that are redistributed funds 80% of the time that doctors spend doing research. I mean, there is some peer review, but compared to what we do with essentially this voluntary redistribution of clinical funds, it's a drop in the bucket. We do have several areas of medicine that are dramatically underfunded by the different funding schemes. And what we do is we realize that they're very important. These are colleagues that, essentially can do things that I can't do when I need their help. They're very highly trained, and essentially what we do is we make sure that they're adequately remunerated as well. And so...
Sorry, I don't mean to cut you off, but my time is a little bit limited. Mr. Feely, what's the average income per year of a physician that's a member of the Canadian Medical Association?
Average income would be about, gross income before overhead would be approximately $350,000.
$350,000. So the average income for somebody, should have become a doctor first of all, that's a member of your organization is $350,000. And you're advocating here for a tax break.
We're not advocating for a tax break at all. What we're advocating is to have some tax equity between different structures that are supplying healthcare, I think needed healthcare services to Canadians.
Yeah, well, that's a nice way of putting it, and I commend you for that. But the fact of the matter is that the small business tax deduction is supposed to be used so if there's a group of physicians, all 35 get to split the $500,000 evenly, as opposed to what you guys are advocating, that each individual get the $500,000.
Okay, well, 35 is the number from our group. What we would like is the members of our group to be treated the same as a private practitioner who's out in the community. Now, I'm not going to speak to whether or not the small business deduction is intended for them, but the fact is that it's the inequity between the private practitioner and the person who's trying to practice academic medicine that's the specific problem here.
Okay, fair enough. I do want to comment on one thing. You're saying that if this change, this proposed legislation in the bill, is going to impact recruiting doctors to Canada, is going to impact residency programs, and impact the entire profession across the board. I have a real tough time understanding that, and I will admit right from the beginning that I'm not obviously a doctor. I never went to med school. But I am a lawyer, and I have a lot of cousins that are going through this process. And a lot of them are extremely frustrated by the lack of residency spaces in Canada. They all want to practice medicine in Canada. I have cousins and family from the United States that's, the guy went to Berkeley Med School, one of the best med schools in the world, gave up millions probably in the US because he wanted to raise his kids in Canada. Right? So I think that people make a decision on where they live more than the tax. And I'm sure the argument goes both ways, right? But there is an argument to be made that Canada is a better place to live, to raise your family, and that's where doctors want to stay as well. But I do want to hear your comments further on the fact that, how is this going to impact residency? Because we have so many students that want to come do their residency in Canada. We don't have enough spaces, to be honest. I have cousins who have gone to med school and couldn't get residency.
Raj, we're going to have to cut you there, and if there's a quick answer, and then Mr. Luzon hasn't any questions, we'll go to him if that's okay. Mr. Davies.
Quick answer. The residents could be impacted by the lack of the good teachers. I'd like to make a differentiation between living in Canada and joining an academic practice like the one we support. And what we're saying is that these rules that have been put in place specifically disadvantages us in an academic practice that's trying to support this academic mission to recruit somebody who might just go to the community. Now, he may live in Canada, but he's not practicing that top-tier medicine that we're trying to promote.
Fair enough. Thank you, sir.
Thank you both. Mr. Luzon.
Well, thank you, Chair. I would like to ask my question to Mr. Woodrick. Can I ask in French? Okay. Je suis ici aujourd'hui pour...
I'm here today to represent my colleague, Steve McKinnon. I won't be able to ask questions without going along the same lines as Steve. Mr. Woodrick, you talked at a few points about the study that the committee is going to undertake. In your opinion, you've already came up with a few solutions. You named certain sectors. In your opinion, what part of the code specifically would we really need to reform in order to simplify that tax code?
Yes, with respect to the Income Tax Act specifically, personal tax credits are certainly one thing. The previous government was very fond of certain measures, fitness tax credit, arts credit, these types of credits. We were never big fans of these measures. We think, again, they play favorites. To give this government credit, they have looked at repealing a number of those. That said, they've chosen to introduce a few of their own, so we think it's a little bit of a trade-off. And then, with respect to taxes more broadly, we think that it would be a fair trade to look at the removal of certain tax credits for businesses in exchange for a lower overall business tax rate. There are concerns when certain sectors receive certain favorable treatment. It's simply not fair to other sectors. So the easiest way to do that is to take them all out and lower the overall rate for everybody.
Okay, puis j'aimerais ajouter à ça.
Add on to that, what would be the benefits that we could draw from simplifying this code? What are the benefits we could get from that?
One is certainly greater ease of compliance. There are compliance costs with a complicated tax code, so making it simpler would make it easier to comply. Removing barriers in the economy, I think, is good for the economy. If you send signals that certain sectors receive certain preferences, you may be harming other sectors inadvertently. And so I think by making a level playing field across sectors, it benefits everyone.
Si on pose la question inversement.
I ask the question, what would be the consequences for the government if it does not simplify those rules or that code and continue to promote various tax deductions? There will be consequences. According to what you have said, there would be consequences, and so what are they?
Well, you certainly, I think we can all agree right now that the economy is in slow growth mode. This government has stated repeatedly its objective is to boost growth. So I think not removing those would not be in service of that objective. I think, this government was elected on a platform of change. If it's going to do business the same way as all previous governments is, I don't really think it's keeping true to that.
Well, one more quick question.
Yep.
The other question, Mr. Snap. Vous m'avez beaucoup interpellé sur...
I listened carefully to your explanation of your role as ombudsman, and I would like to know how the government would be benefited by the fact that all institutions offer an ombudsman service. What would the benefits be for our government if your service were pan-Canadian?
An ombudsman is a dispute resolution tool that offers an objective look at a situation. You know, our service is geared towards the banks. We are governed by FCAC. We have strict parameters and terms of reference. You know, there's health ombudsman. So I think the ombudsman is a very beneficial thing all across, but I think it also has to be designed for each organization or type of legislation that it governs.
Okay, with that, we will have to. I have one question really to the Canadian Medical Association, Mr. Feely. MD Financial is an in-house advisory to Canadian Medical Association and doctors, correct?
That is correct.
Do you know? And we have your numbers, which come up with a certain opinion. We have Finance Canada's numbers, which come up with a certain opinion or a certain figure. Is there any independent analysis out there on the numbers that we can lay our hands on in terms of what the cost of this would be to the medical profession? Beyond the other implications that you're talking about in terms of some going to the United States, et cetera, is there anywhere where there's an independent analysis that's not Finance Canada and that's not MD Financial?
Not at present, but we'd be happy to engage or together engage a third party to review the numbers. Happy to do that.
Problem is we're under a very tight time frame. Anyway, we'll give that a little thought. I'd love to see what those independent numbers would be. With that, committee members, tomorrow we meet in 112 North, clause by clause on C26, and we go till we're done. So with that, witnesses, thank you very much for your presentations and your responses, and coming some of you on short notice. Thank you very much. Meeting adjourned.